Hi, B Nation. Welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Boy, I feel like I haven't seen you guys in forever. We didn't do a show this weekend. We had to cancel yesterday's show because we had a meeting over at Notre Dame. And I've kind of missed y'all a little bit, to be honest with you. And I'm excited today. Fall camp starts tomorrow. I am going to be heading over to Notre Dame Stadium or Notre Dame's facilities tomorrow. 9:30 practice we have tomorrow. I'm excited about that. It's our first full chance. We're going to get to see the whole practice. It's actually our only full practice opportunity of fall camp. So we're not going to have a ton of fall camp availability. Just so you guys know, we're not going to – I think we get like maybe six practices that we're going to get to see, including the first three. So we'll have a lot to report on what we see there. So tomorrow's show will be a TBD as far as the or TBA, I guess, as far as the time when it'll start, because we're going to have practice at 9:30. That usually goes for about 2 hours. I'm going to come back from practice, write the practice report, put that up, then we'll do the show. So it's probably going to be, 2 o'clock show tomorrow, just to let you all know kind of what that plan is for tomorrow. It will not likely not be a 1 o'clock show because of the practice schedule and the content that we got to get done for that. But it'll be worth it because it's going to be a lot of fun tomorrow. We're going to have obviously I'm going to have my practice reports at irishbreakdown.com. We'll get them up on the message board first. Then we'll put them out on the irishbreakdown.com channel. And then, of course, we'll do a show, and I'll talk about what I saw at yesterday's practice, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing that. Keeping in mind that this is a non-padded practice, but it will be good to see guys out there running around. How do guys look? What kind of competition, kind of energy, who's playing where? Those will be good things to see. And then, of course, that'll give us a gauge on what we'll be able to evaluate when we get to the end of fall camp. We'll say, okay, well, here's where they started and here's where they finished, right? And as we get ready to go into the Texas A&M game. And I'm telling you, we're tomorrow also not only first day of fall camp, but it's 1 month until the season kicks off. I'm so excited. It helps me get over the fact that I went last week and bought my flight and my hotel for the Texas A&M game to cover that game. That stung a little. So now that you kind of get past that and start thinking about, the upcoming season and fall camp, get excited about that for sure. So let's talk about today's show. What are we going to talk about today? Number one, we're going to talk about fall camp. We're going to preview fall camp. And so we're going to get into some of the different aspects of it. I'm going to talk a little bit of big picture about the season and this team. And then I'm going to get into a what to look for type of discussion. And it's not so much, some of them are kind of questions, but it's not so much, the questions about the team. I've written articles about that. We'll talk about that as we get closer to the season. But it's more of, what am I looking for? When you get to fall camp, what is it that you're looking for? What do you want to see? You got people in the chat asking, we had a super chat from AST12321. Thank you for super chat, by the way. And I'll answer this one here later. But, it says, what do you need to see from CJ Carr this fall to know he's on pace to be the future of the Notre Dame football versus what do you want to see from Riley Leonard now? I'll dive into that when I get into the what I'm looking for section. But that's an example of where I am in regard to, fall camp. It's, what are you looking to see? What do you want to see from this team? It's not so much, some of the questions that have to be answered. Some of it's a good thing. And what are you looking for? What's going to define this football team? And I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see, who this team is going to be and what the DNA of this team is going to be. And, every fall camp, there's guys to step up, right? I'm looking for that. That's sort of a big picture team thing. Who are the veterans that step up? We do these articles and we do these shows during the off season about, senior step up and sophomore surge and freshman impact and all that. Well, now's the time when we start to see who those players are. We see it all the time, right? I mean, you think of Javon McKinley stepping up in 2020. You think of Howard Cross's breakout last year. You go back over the years, and every year there's certain things that happen every year, especially on good teams. Some veteran player that didn't do a whole lot in his career has a breakout season. Some sophomore that maybe you're not anticipating stepping up and performing well, steps up and performs well. Some freshman we weren't expecting to be a star becomes a star. There's all types of things that happen with a football team as it evolves. And those are things that you start to see in fall camp. some of those things you can't know. You can't know, like if I was able to say, okay, this one random player is going to have this huge breakout, book it down, mark it, it'd be kind of take some of the fun out of it. I don't know who some of those guys are. I have some things that I'm excited about. And by the way, if you're not on the message board, you are definitely missing out. This year's intel piece was one of the most thorough that I've done, to be honest with you. And we had an offensive intel piece, a defensive intel piece. I have talked to a ton of sources around the program, gotten a ton of intel about, the quarterbacks, the receivers, the O-line, lots on the D-line and the secondary. People that are already members can tell you there was a ton of stuff in there. Also had some intel stuff on Deuce Knight on the message board yesterday. So if you're not on the message board, it is the perfect time to sign up, boards.irishbreakdown.com. If for some reason, when you first sign up, you try to log in and it doesn't allow you to do so, just shoot me an email. I'll get you squared away. We're working through a little bit of a glitch right now, but you'll get squared away very quickly. But there's tons of great content on there. In my opinion, I was really fired up writing it and really fired up getting it, talking to all the different sources. You see the continuity between different people and what they say about certain things. And that's when you kind of get excited, when it's like, okay, well, everybody's telling me this. So you feel better that there's a chance that it's going to happen. So lots of great intel pieces on there. Two intel pieces on just the team. And then, of course, there's a couple intel pieces yesterday on Deuce Knight. So board members only. Not going to talk about it in the chat. Not going to talk about that intel on the show. You got to be a board member to see it. But man, there's some stuff that has me excited about what this team can be. And if the sources that I talk to are correct and what they're seeing from this team, it's going to be fun. But you're going to know if you're an intel, if you're on the board, you're going to kind of know, like, well, when certain player breaks out, you're like, oh yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me because we heard this summer that this guy was a breakout. So there's lots of reasons to be a board member, but those are reasons to be excited about the season, right? That's the big thing, is that's what's got me fired up about what this season is going to be, because there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of good players. We're going to find out just how good this staff is at recruiting when you look at the fact that there's so much of this roster is now made up of guys that this staff has recruited to campus. And I'm excited to see what it's going to do, and excited to see what this team is capable of. So when you talk about fall camp, we'll kind of preview this a little bit before we dive into what to look for. Look, this is a big year for Notre Dame. In my opinion, this is a huge year for Notre Dame. Is this an end-all be-all? No, it's not. Is this a situation where if Freeman doesn't do this, it means he's not that? No, I don't think it's that. I do believe, however, that this program needs to take a jump this season for a lot of reasons. And we've talked a lot about them. Don't need to rehash them again. We'll talk about them a little bit differently and in more detail as we get closer to the season, and we can actually talk about the season. But fall camp is such an important part to that. And people ask, like, we get questions on the buy so hold and the mailbags, like, what's the most important time of the season? And my argument is they're all important. I mean, they're all important in some way. The importance of fall camp is obviously this is the last chance to truly mold your team. And there's always evolving aspects to your team as you go through the season. There's always things that maybe you're good at in September that maybe you're not as good at, or even way better than by the time you get to November. There's maybe some things you're not as good at early in the season that by the end of the year you get better at. There's position groups that get better throughout the season. There's players that may start the beginning of the year, but by the end of the year, they're not starting. I've pointed to the 2016 USC team that started 1-3 with 2 blowout losses. They make a quarterback change. They have some other changes. And by the end of the year, that's one of the best teams in college football. I was talking with a friend of mine about that, about that team last night. So there are different aspects of your team that you're always evolving. But this is the last period where you're truly able to mold your team. And one of the questions we got, and I don't remember if it was in the mailbag or if it was the buy so hold, I think it's a mailbag. But it's when you look at your team and the difference between like fall camp and practice, once you get to practice, it's all game prep. There's sort of this continuity between it. Tuesday you do this, Wednesday you do this, Thursday you do this, Friday you do this, game on Saturday. and certain aspects of the week will change. We're obviously going to focus on this concept this week because we're, getting ready to play this defense who does that. We're going to, focus on this coverage this week where maybe we didn't do it last week, but there's still that consistency of your approach on a day-to-day basis, and you're geared towards nothing but that Saturday. Fall camp is a little different. You're obviously working towards games, and you'll do some things early that say, hey, look, we think we need to be good at this to beat A&M, and we're going to start working on some of that now. You don't completely shut out game prep for A&M in the first couple weeks of practice, but the first couple weeks of fall camp, the emphasis is a little bit different. Yes, you're focusing on scheme. Yes, you're focusing on, the technical aspects and the refinement in that regard, but there's still a lot of culture building during this period of time. I know, speaking as a player and coach, the summer workouts are important, but this is the period where your team truly comes together as one or not. And whether that happens is going to tell you a lot about where this team is. And, does this team, do they connect together on the field? Do they connect together off the field? The leadership that you hope that you've been cultivating all offseason starts to either come to fruition now or not, and that tells you where you are as a football team. So, leadership doesn't emerge the first day of December across the board. The first day of December or first day of January when you get back. That first day of January, there will be some leaders that emerge as, hey, vocally, I'm going to be a take charge guy now. But their actions have to then back that up the next, now we're in July, so next 7 months. Same thing is if some guys maybe don't step up to that early leadership role, but as this winter and then spring and now summer comes on, you start to then emerge into that leadership role, either by your actions or because you're more of a vocal leader. Then when you get to fall camp, it's when it really comes to pass of who you are as a leader, right? Or what your leadership structure is as a whole with your football team. And so those are all aspects of it that you have to look at as a football coach and say, hey, listen, who are we? What's the character of our football team? And yes, you learn parts about that throughout the offseason. You're going to learn parts about that in the winter. You're going to learn parts about that in the summer. You're going to learn parts about that in spring ball. You're going to learn parts about that in fall camp. But the fall camp is that final period where, okay, here's who we are. It starts to become clear who you are. But at the same time, there still is that last little bit of time for molding, right? So if you're just not a physical group, day one, you can improve it, but you're just not going to then become the 85 Bears with the 2017 Notre Dame offensive line by the end of fall camp, right? That process has already begun. But if you feel we're physical, but we haven't harnessed it in the proper manner, that's where fall camp harnesses it. Hey, we have a lot of speed, but guys don't necessarily know how to put it all together yet. Now is when you harness it. Hey, we feel like we've got some leadership stepping up, but this guy just needs that final push. This guy needs that final opportunity to where in fall camp you create some of those circumstances that then put guys in a leadership challenge where they're going to step up and lead or they're not. And part of it is like in fall camp, it's like there's times in fall camp, and I learned this from some of the best coaches I was around. I learned this from being around Bowling Green when Urban Meyer and his staff were there. There's some days you're going into practice and you're basically saying, I'm going to be a giant jerk today, right? Not jerk is like your MF players, but like nothing's going to be good enough for me today. I'm going to be on them all day. I'm going to ride them. I'm going to push them. You say, well, why would you do that? Well, number one, I'm trying to get them out of their comfort zone. You don't want guys to necessarily get complacent at camp. That's a small part of it. The other parts of it are, look, I need to challenge them mentally, right? Like, okay, I know this guy can run routes. I know this guy's fast and he can catch. But how's he going to be when you get to Saturday and that other cornerback's kicking his butt or he's in his ear, he's talking trash or fans are screaming at him or whatever? I'm putting him in uncomfortable emotional and mental state to see how he responds. If he can't handle me on a middle of fall camp Tuesday Tuesday morning, getting on him and constantly just, no, it's not good enough. Give me more. You're better than that. Give me more. Then how's he going to handle when things really get tough on a Saturday in front of tens of thousands of people with millions of people watching at home. Right. So there's parts of that. That's part of the building process. And then there's other days where you're like, hey, I've ridden them pretty hard the last few days. Today, it's about building them back up. Right. It's about encouragement. It's maybe that guy that you rode real hard the last couple of days. You see him start to put his head down a little bit. Now today is the day that I put my arm around him and we talk about why I'm hard on him and why I'm demanding on him and what I think he's capable of and how much I care about him. That's all part of the building up the mind and the body and the soul of your football team. And if you can focus on those things and build those things and evolve that aspect of your football team, then you've got a chance to be really, really good. You've got a chance to be a really impactful football team. And that's basically where Notre Dame is right now. They're a team that has an opportunity to they've got a lot of good pieces in place. They've got a lot of talent. They've got a lot of potential. At this point in time, it now comes down to can they put it all together? Can they get it all to click? Can they get it all to say, hey, listen, yes, the talent's here. We've got the leadership pieces in place. We've got the coaching pieces in place, but can you bring it all together? It happens now. You're building towards this period, and this is when it happens. This is when the soul of your football team is truly given, and it's such a great time to be a coach. It really is. Like, this is the part of coaching that I kind of miss. There's a lot about coaching I do not miss, especially in this day of the way recruiting is now. I miss Saturdays, obviously, but and you miss certain parts of the relationships with players and things like that. But like when you really come to the day-to-day grind, this is the part I loved because there's so much strategy that goes into practice every day. And if you're not thinking strategically about the course of your fall camp, and if you're not speaking strategically then what each day then does to build towards that, then you're really not going to get the most out of your football team. So it's not just going out there and going through drills and throwing the ball around and working on tackling and working on, this, smash concept or slot fade concept or whatever the case may be. That's all a part of it. But as a head coach, it's all geared towards, hey, how are we building the soul of this football team? And as a position coach, it's how am I building the soul of this position group, right? If you're a receivers coach, O-line coach, D-line coach, linebackers coach, whatever, how can I build the soul of this group? How can I make sure that we're not just fast and athletic and technically proficient, but that we've also got some mental toughness to us, that we have the ability to handle adversity, that we have the ability to go on the road and get down to a really good football team and say, hey, we're fine. We've been through tougher times in this. Let's just go out and do what we've done. This is why we sweat this summer. This is why we fought so hard in practice. This is why we put up with all this. This is why we did all this, because of this moment right here, we're prepared to handle it. And fall camp is the time where that's established. And by the time you get to the end of fall camp, you know who your football team is to a degree. There are certain things you can't really truly learn until you get to games. But for the most part, this is when you kind of say, okay, I really feel like we are in a position now where we've been able to build this team and mold this team and cultivate this team to the point where we're now ready to turn them loose on the world. And that's what I love about this period of fall camp. And that's really what Notre Dame has in front of them. And you talk about why it matters. This is a great time for coming together. This is a great time for development. This is a great time where character gets developed. And then also the final piece is this is when your lineup gets established to a degree, at least at the start of the season. Like, who steps up and wins starting jobs? I mean, guys, there's starting battles at right tackle, left guard, wide receiver, kind of D end, linebacker, corner, safety. There's battles for number 2 jobs. Like, who's going to be the number 2 quarterback? Who's going to be the, hey, if number 1, 2, and 3 receivers are established, who's 4, 5, and 6, right? Okay, you've got number 1 tight end. Who's number 2? Who's number 3? You've got defensive end. Okay, you've got you're 3 deep across the board now with talented players. Who's 1? Who's 2? Who's 3? Do you have 2 safeties you feel good about? Do you have 3 safeties you feel good about? Do you have 4 safeties you feel good about? These are when those things start to happen, and those battles start to kind of reach their culmination point, and somebody wins a job. And there's always times when you think who's going to be the guy, and you end up not being it. A year ago at this time, we're looking at this football team saying, hey, man, we think this team has a chance to go out and and be really good on the offensive line. And we think this guy's going to start, and we think Billy Strouth is going to be starting left guard. We'll come to find out that's not how it played out, right? It didn't play out that way. Pat Coogan ends up starting. You think this guy's going to be a top receiver. He ends up not playing a whole lot, or he ends up getting hurt. And there's all types of things that go into it, to where what you think your team is going to be going into fall camp isn't always what your team looks like coming out of fall camp. And that's one of the things that Notre Dame has in front of it is we're going to start to find those answers, right? And you start to look at who your team is and what they're capable of, and the heart, soul of your team is really developed at this point in time. And so when people ask me, why is fall camp so important? What makes fall camp different? That's all it. Now, it's a vitally important piece, right? And it sounds like, well, it makes it seem like fall camp's the most important period. No, because such a foundation has to be laid before that to even get you there. And if that foundation isn't laid properly, then you're making up for and overcoming the sins of the past, so to speak. And that's not really where you want to be. And so this is why I love fall camp. It's why I love fall camp. Why I loved fall camp as a coach. It's why I love fall camp now. It's why I get so bummed every year when we don't get the access that I want them to give us, which is every practice. It's like, even if, say, you can't report on it, still let us be there and see it. Because I miss that part of coaching. I miss that part of watching this team develop, watching what a guy looks like in practice 1 compared to what a guy looks like in practice 14. Because here's another fun part of fall camp. You see guys every year, and every coach and out there is gonna know what I'm talking about, whether you coach football or something else, right? You always have those guys, and if you coach ladies, those ladies that come out in the beginning of fall of practice, and they look like $1 million. And in football, this is especially true because on day 1 of fall camp, you don't have pads on. It's just helmets. You're not out there laying each other out, and you've got those guys that come out and they look like $1 million, and they're fresh, and they're happy, and they're healthy, and they come out like gangbusters. I want to see what that guy looks like on practice 15, because about that halfway point, you start to say, okay, well, this guy doesn't have that juice anymore, right? Some guys power through it and they still can maintain. Some guys are like, they hit that wall and they are done. And then, okay, some guys hit that wall, and then you find out, okay, what comes next? Do you go out and push through it and then come out of it, or do you hit that wall and just kind of go backwards? Those are all parts of fall camp, because I've kind of joked about this in the past, and I've said, what I love about fall camp is there's an emotional roller coaster you go through as a coach, right? And every football coach, I think, will be able to attest to this. The beginning of fall camp, you're so excited and you think you can beat everybody. And then you come out the first 3 days of camp with no pads on, and it confirms everything you feel about that team, right? It confirms that, hey, we are this, we are that, and you feel like you can beat anybody. Man, I would play anybody today. I think we can beat anybody. And then you get to about the end of week 1, going into week 2, and you go through that period in your mind where you're like, I don't think we're going to beat anybody this year. We're terrible, because you hit that wall. You hit it as a coach. You've been grinding every day. You're away from your family a lot of times. It's just your players are just kind of, your guys that are running 4.4s are running 4.8s now because they got those camp legs. Your quarterbacks are throwing frozen ropes on 25-yard comebacks, or now can't hit a 5-yard out, because you get that camp arm. And there's a reason you get these camp insert body part, because you hit that wall. And when as a coach and mentally you're watching practice, you're like, God, we're terrible. We're not going to beat anybody. And then over the next couple weeks, you guys push through those. It's all part of the building your body up process and your mind up process. And by the end of fall camp, you say, okay, here's who we are. Here's who we are going to be as a team. You have that realistic view of who you're going to be. And sometimes it's back to the, hey, we can beat anybody. And sometimes you're like, yeah, we stink, and so those are all part of what I love about the evolution of fall camp. Because I promise you, if you were to talk to a coach now, talk to a coach in a week, like if I could get a position coach or a coordinator, the head coach, on the phone after every week, right? So if I were to talk to, let's say Al Golden today, and in truthful, where he's just being open and honest, and I don't know Coach Golden, so I'm using him as an example. And he tells me about the team. We're just talking coaches in the office, going over everything, and he's gonna be kind of excited about what this group is. And then if I talk to him in a week from now, his tone is probably going to be a little different. And then if I talk to him a week after that, it's going to be different. And then a week after that's going to be different, because that's the evolution of your team. Some things about your team, you're going to find out like, wow, we're better here than I thought we were going to be. Or in other cases, I was hoping we'd be further along here than we are, but we're not. And that's disappointing. And so, and then maybe some of those things you power through and other things that you don't, to be honest with you. So those are all aspects of fall camp that I am really looking forward to for this year. So that's kind of my preview of fall camp, what to look for, why this period matters, and just overall, just sort of what the excitement is and how important this period is, because this period is truly going to determine just what kind of football team Notre Dame is. And it's not about your talent, your athleticism. You either have that or you don't. Day one, tomorrow, July 31st, somebody's not going to run a 4.7 today and run a 4.4 tomorrow. It doesn't change your ability. If you are not accurate today, you're not going to be accurate tomorrow, right? If you aren't strong today, you're not going to be strong tomorrow. It doesn't change who you are athletically. It changes who you are mentally. It changes who you are maybe from a character standpoint, and it changes who you are as a team, because it's that period to come together. And that's what has me excited about fall camp, and that's the opportunity that's in front of Notre Dame. So the first kind of specific part of what I want to talk about when you talk about sort of the fall camp preview is what to look for. And, what to look for from the Notre Dame offense, which we'll do first, and then what to look for from the Notre Dame defense. And these are sort of some of the bigger picture things that we'll discuss about what I'm looking for and what I'm hoping to see from these groups. And the first one, I got all my notes kind of plotted out, and I start moving around. I got like arrows. Okay, let's talk about this one first. And the one that absolutely that I think needs to be talked about first when talking about what I'm looking for and what I'm excited to see, is what's this version of the Mike Denbrock offense going to look like? Like when you're a football coach, there's certain things that you believe in. There's certain principles that you believe in. And a lot of people, you play Madden or you play NCAA or, you think you watch football on TV, and a lot of times you can kind of get into, well, I like smash, or I like inside zone, or this kind of concept. And that's part of it, but it's not even so much just about that. I mean, you have things you believe in, but it's sort of like, okay, but what is it going to look like here? And Mike Denbrock is taking the same offense he ran at LSU and Cincinnati, and he's going to implement it at Notre Dame. Well, guys, Mike Denbrock didn't take the offense at Cincinnati and go to LSU and just say, you know what, trashing that offense, we're going to start something brand new. There were obviously wrinkles that were added as he evolved in the town he had, just like there's certain things that he did at Cincinnati where he's not going to be like, okay, we're going to do the same exact thing here at LSU. Different talent, but we're going to, because this is what I believe in, running this play or this alignment or this personnel group, right? And so when you look at LSU's offense last year, there's a lot you take from what Mike Denbrock did the last 2 years at LSU, what he did at Cincinnati in 2021, what he did at Notre Dame in 2015. And you say, there's some things that have changed schematically over the years as he's evolved as a coach and as his talent changes from year to year. But there's certain principles that are going to be true. And so we know those. I believe that we know what those are. But what is it then going to look like practically with this offense? So, I know that Mike Denbrock believes in balance. I know that Mike Denbrock believes in being explosive. I know that he believes in being efficient. I know that he believes in spreading the field, and even when you're trying to run the ball, try to get, widen the box, try to, get into numbers advantages, try to get into certain personnel advantages in the run game, certain personnel advantages in the pass game, finding weak spots in the defense. Those are all things that Mike Denbrock believes. But when you look at this specific Notre Dame team, okay, how's he going to get to those things? At LSU, the last year, it was 3 receiver sets and running the ball this way and throwing the ball this way. Well, what's it going to look like at Notre Dame? You had a lot of vertical oriented players. You had guys that were really dynamic, at LSU you had Malik Neighbors and you had Bryan Thomas, who are 4-3 guys, and Notre Dame has some very talented receivers. I don't think they got a lot of 4-3 guys running around like Malik Neighbors and Bryan Thomas. They have different types of athletes. So how does it evolve? How does it not evolve? How does it adapt to the talent he has? He's got a much more dynamic running back room. How does that evolve? How does that adapt? How is he going to utilize that? Where last year the running backs were kind of a complementary piece to the puzzle. You look at the run game statistics last year, and LSU was a very good running team last year. They could run on a lot of people. And I believe they were over 200 yards a game rushing last year. Let me go pull up the numbers here real quick and just make sure that I'm correct on that. They were, 204.5 yards per game last year. Average 6.2 yards per carry. Those are pretty good numbers. But their quarterback was the driver of that, right? I mean, their quarterback was their leading rusher at 1,134 yards. The next guy in line was Logan Diggs at 653. The next guy was at 284. They only had 3 guys that rushed for over 200 yards last year at LSU. And you're starting your top 3 backs were barely over 1,000 yards last season because they were complements to the dynamic quarterback and the dynamic receivers. That wasn't a wrong decision. It was the right decision for that team. Well, when you look at Notre Dame, they're going to have a group of players that look a lot different. Their running back room should be a lot more of a focal point than what it was at LSU. Notre Dame's tight end room should be a lot more of a focal point than it was at LSU last season. And the receivers should still be important, but they're not going to be quite used the way that they were at LSU. They're different players with different skill sets, same compared to how the LSU guys were used compared to Cincinnati. So what does that look like? That's something I'm looking to see in fall camp. You do things in the spring. Okay, I think we can be good here. Let's practice these things. And there's some things you say, we're just not good at that, so let's throw it out. Or, hey, we weren't good enough at that, so let's go ahead and do it more of it. You know what I mean? And really work on it and get better at it because we need to be good there. Those are things that you have to find out. When you talk about who you are as a football team and who you are as an offense is, and some things you're going to say, look, we did this, but we're going to add this. We're going to build onto this, and you evolve. Well, what's that going to look like? And that's something that I'm looking for in fall camp because this is when your DNA is really established as an offense, right? It kind of goes back to the big picture team thing. There are going to be things when you look at the offense they're going to run in November. There's going to be things they're doing in November that we didn't see a whole lot of in September or August 31st. There's going to be concepts that maybe they run that they didn't run early in the year because they evolved to that. There are going to be emphases that change in November compared to September. But the foundation gets laid now, right? And so are they going to be a heavy inside-outside zone team like he's been in the past? They're going to do more pin and pull like Joe Rudolph likes to do. Those are all questions that we're going to find out, but that's all part of who Notre Dame is going to be and what I'm looking for in fall camp. And I'm very excited to see what this football team is going to be and to see what they're capable of. And it's the first thing that I'm looking for when I talk about what this offense is going to be. Number 2, Riley Leonard, right? That's what I'm looking to see in fall camp. And it's not about, is he healthy? I mean, we've talked about that, but look, we didn't get a chance to really see Riley Leonard during the spring. We didn't get a chance to, we saw him at I think the first practice or 2. We got a chance to see with no pads on. We didn't get to see him be himself in a Notre Dame uniform, even in spring practice. And he was there. They weren't really running with him. They were kind of building him up. They weren't, that he was getting comfortable with the offense, and then he was out. So what's he going to look like? I've heard a lot of good things about what he's done this offseason. So you can, go read the intel piece at boards.irishbreakdown.com and check that out and see kind of what I talked about there and what we're hearing about him. Okay, well, now I want to see it. It's good that the intel tells me that he's doing this and doing that, but now I want to see it. I want to see what kind of connection he has with the receivers. What the summer work they've been putting in. How on the same page is he with Chris Mitchell, with Bo Collins, with Jaden Greathouse, with Jordan Faison, with KK Smith, with Jaden Thomas, with Deion Colsey, with all Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, whoever, Logan Soldate, Joe, all those guys, right? Mitchell Evans. How is he going to be there? How is the team going to respond to him? We haven't seen that yet. We've heard a lot of great things about He's a leader, and the kids love him. And obviously, he had a bunch of players go down to Alabama with him to work out. That's a good sign. But how do they respond to him now that he's the leader of the team, right? And because, like, look, there's no quarterback battle for number one. People may say that there is, but there isn't. Riley Leonard's the starter as long as he's healthy. And so we don't have to waste time with, I'm sure Marcus Freeman will name him the quarterback, because honestly, someone's going to ask at a press conference, when are you going to name your starting quarterback, as if we don't already know, right? So he may do that, but at the end of the day, we know he's a starting quarterback if he's healthy. So how does he handle being the guy? And I really hope that the coaches don't do something like not have him with the first team at the beginning and just create that nonsense narrative. He's the starting quarterback if he's healthy. How quickly can he win the team over now that they're on the field? Hurdy did it in the spring. Hurdy's done it in the summer. That's all fine and dandy. But now you got to do it when the pads are popping. And so we're going to see that. And I just overall just want to see what he looks like in a Notre Dame uniform and just what kind of player you think he's going to be. Like when I first saw him in the spring, one thing I noticed is he's a lot bigger than I thought. Like, he not that he looked small at Duke. I mean, he looked like a good-sized kid, but you really like, this kid's got some really good size to him. I want to see what he looks like athletically. I want to see how comfortable he is going through his progressions. Like, look, the Mike Denbrock offense is a very unique, is uniquely different from what he did with Kevin Johns at Duke. And I'm not saying not better, not worse. It's just different. I'm not trying to throw shade at Kevin Johns. It's just different. The Duke offense was very much about quick game and timing and, quick reads. Hey, you got this, and you're throwing here. There was some horizontal stretch stuff. There were some downfield reads, but it was an offense that was really dominated by the short to intermediate game. Now, of course, that's an important part to Mike Denbrock's offense, but in this offense, you have to be much better at attacking down the field. Whether it's through horizontal stretches like, the four verts, whether it's more of a vertical stretch like your flood concept, like your deep overs. Mike Denbrock's going to ask his quarterback to hit that backside read a lot more. There's a lot of concepts that Mike Denbrock has, and it's one of the film breakdowns I did. I talked about this, with some of the concepts that I broke down already, is you're going to read on one side, and I've got, my slot fade read over here, but I've got to read it to where I may be coming backside and hitting this backside dig. They would do a lot of that at LSU. You've got to be able to say, okay, if this guy does this to take this away, I got to know I'm coming back to that dig. And if you're coming back to the dig, you're not throwing blind. You never want to throw blind, but you're kind of throwing it quick. So you've got to have a really good feel for who I need to see as I turn back to throw that dig. I got to find with my eyes where that defender that could be an MDM, most dangerous man, is, and make sure he's not there. And if he is, then you tuck it and run and you take the check down. So those are all parts of what you're going to be asked to do that he wasn't asked to do a lot at Duke. And I think that's part of the reason that I think Riley Leonard is going to have a chance to really rise up draft boards, because he's going to be playing in a far more, complex NFL style pass offense. And then you also want to make sure he maintains that ability to really hurt you with his legs. And so I'm excited to see all that. And that's why Riley Leonard is the guy that I'll talk about next. And then, of course, you transition into the offensive line. Marcus Freeman has said it a million times. And guys, I don't know Coach Freeman very well, but this is one thing that I do know about him. He's not giving you lip services that we're going to be a line-driven team, right? A lot of coaches say things, we need to really be good at running the ball. And then you're like, well, how come you never run the ball? You always talk about it, but it's because it's coach speak. It's like you get taught as a coach, these are certain things you're just supposed to say. Whether you believe it or not, you're supposed to say that because the donors like to hear that and the fans like to hear that and the media people love that and they sop that up. So if I don't want them talking about this and not talking about this, then I'm going to give them this and let them go chew on that for a while, and they won't be talking about this. Like I'm confident that when Marcus Freeman talks about he wants to be a line-driven program, he means it and he wants to be that. Well, you can't be that if you don't have a dominant offensive line, or at least a very good offensive line. And how good is this offensive line going to be? We don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing that evolution throughout fall camp, how good they're going to be. But honestly, a lot of it is I want to see the battles take place too, because I believe this year there's a lot more real battles. We thought that Billy Schrouth was in a competition to be the left guard last year, but from what I'm told, that battle was over before it began once you got to fall camp. It just was. And they pretty much first day at camp, they had their starting lineup pretty much figured out. Well, this year it's a lot different. You know, who is your left guard going to be? I've been told that it's a legitimate competition, and it's not just between two guys. It could potentially be between three guys. Same thing at right tackle. We all know the players involved. I had an article about it today, about how important the right tackle battle is at irishbreakdown.com. You know, talking about, you know, hey, listen, this is who's going to be in the battle, and however it goes out is going to determine, you know, sort of are you raising the floor with this offensive line, or are you raising the ceiling with this offensive line? And who the answer to that's going to be determine who starts at right tackle, right? And same thing a little bit at left guard. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing those battles. And here's why it matters. I want to see if they are going to start someone just because after 25 practices, this guy just happened to grade out better. And so we're going to go with him because he just, you know, played a little better than that other guy. Okay, that's not a bad thing. A bad thing is neither guy played well, and this guy is graded out the highest of two guys that didn't play well. That's a bad thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, you know, they're just both solid. This guy was just a little bit more steady than that guy, so we're going to go with this guy. All right, I mean, that's fine. You know, I guess you want to be steady up front in the offensive line. But what you really want as a coach, and I would hope this is true of an offensive line coach as well, but I can't say for sure because I have never coached the offensive line. But I would assume this is true because it was true when I was a running backs coach and a quarterbacks coach and a receivers coach, is you want guys that come in and say, this is mine. This position is mine. And I don't mean say it like verbally say it. I don't care what they say. I mean, go out there and just with how they go about their business. Like, look, man, I appreciate you being in this battle. You've been pushing me all off season, but now it's time for me to separate. And I'm going to go out there and be that dude. I want to see that. I want to see that from this offensive line. I want to see somebody, whether it's Tosh Baker or Emil Wagner or Gerby Lambert, go out there in fall camp and say, I'm the right tackle. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you competing. You made me better, and I'll thank you for that. But right now, this is mine. I'm the guy at right tackle, and I'm the guy because of look how I'm performing. I'm grading out at a high level. I'm consistent. I'm doing my job, but I'm also kicking butt. Right? That's what you want to see. You want somebody that does that, not just somebody that just goes out there and does their job every snap and just kind of handles business. That's fine. But you want a guy that comes out there and does that, but whoops people. That's what you want on the offensive line. You want that at left guard too. You know, who's that guy that just goes out there, not just does his job every snap, but you want someone to step up and say, I'm going to do my job every snap, but I'm going to do it really well. Right? There's two types of ways of doing your job as an offensive lineman. One is I just did my job. I'm supposed to secure the A-gap. I'm supposed to play with this particular technique, and I'm supposed to kind of shade this guy, and we're going to cut it here. And I did that. They had a little bit of a stalemate. Running back got 4 yards. But you know what? I did my job. All right, cool. You get a check on the grade sheet. Then there's the guy that comes off. I'm supposed to secure this gap. I'm supposed to play with this kind of footwork and angle, and I'm going to do that. But when I hit this guy, I'm moving him 5 feet, right? Or I'm moving him. Sometimes it's just a foot. So, I mean, like I think of one of the best individual like run game blocks I've seen of the last 7-8 years was actually a block by Alex Bars. And it was a play where they were running inside zone and a lineman kind of attacked him to his right shoulder, so in the B gap. And Alex took that guy with his outside arm, his right arm, and threw the guy back into the A gap about 2 feet. And that throwing him back into the A gap allowed Josh Adams to cut right behind him for an 80-yard touchdown, right? If that guy stays in that B gap and Josh has got a force to go A gap, that guy probably comes off the block, or Josh is now about 3 feet to the left or 3 yards to the left, excuse me, and now you've got the backside backers have a better chance of making a play on him. But because he could cut behind Alex, which is where you wanted that run to go, you're able to have an 80-yard touchdown run. And so like that wasn't Josh or Alex just doing his job. That was Alex doing his job in a dominant fashion, which allowed them to go for 80 against a top 15 team on national TV. Right? Like, who's that guy? Who's that guy that says, this is my job, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it really well. And that means I'm moving people off the line. I'm getting to the second level. Because, like, if I'm running an inside zone and I'm blocking with a center, right? So it's me, I'm the right guard, or I'm the left guard, and I'm working with Ashton Craig. And we're working a combo block on the inside zone where me and him are blocking the A-gap, and we're trying to get up to that Mike linebacker. And we kind of hit that A-gap guy, and we're trying to move him. We're moving our feet. We're not getting really any movement. That linebacker crashes into the gap. I come off that block and I get a body on him. Okay, I've kind of done my job, but I didn't really do the job in a way that's going to allow us to go out there and really have a big play. The way that we do our job dominantly is me and Ashton working together. We're going to come off and get this A-gap double team against the nose. We're going to move him about 3 or 4 feet at least back, right? Couple yards at least, hopefully, right? Which would be, 5, 6 feet. But, at least a yard is where you want to – you move him back. And as you move that guy back, because you're getting a vertical push off the line, you're moving that guy. Now that linebacker has to get downhill a little bit quicker, right? So now I get off my block. I'm now engaging him a yard or two down the field. I've got some momentum going, and we're going to push him downfield. Or we push this D tackle so hard when this guy goes to crash, we push the D tackle into him, and that makes my block a lot easier. So instead of, Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price cutting behind me and getting a 4-yard gain, he's now cutting behind me. We've got this great push. He doesn't have to really make a cut till he's 3-4 yards down the field. Now he's got a big play. Those are the things you look for, is you want guys that are doing that. You want guys that are moving people. Are the 2 new starters on the O-line, or the 2 stars in the O-line that we're talking about, not really new at one spot, are they going to be able to be dominant, or are they just going to take it? Right? That's kind of where we're at. So I'm excited about what this group can be. I'm excited about the potential of it, but they're also very cautious about, okay, but are they going to just do their job, or are they going to be dominant? And I'm looking forward to seeing that, because how these battles rage, like if an offensive line battle is handled correctly, 2 things are true. Number one is there's some really good early ferocity. Like, guys are really out there to compete, and they're out there playing hard. And you're like, what are they, these guys are doing this. Like, so it's not so much that you're the guys that are going to start that's setting the tempo and the tone of what you're going to be like as a line. It's the guys battling. Because, hey, dude, I'm fighting for my life right now. Like, let's pick it up. Let's go. Let's get out there. Let's get after this thing. And sometimes it can be those guys that go out there and play with that. And so you get that little bit of an edge early. But then also you need to make sure that when it's obvious, when you know, so that way you have more time as a 5-man line to practice and prepare. You don't necessarily want to make that decision right before the A&M game, like the week before the A&M game. If that's how long it takes, that's how long it takes. Ideally, however, somebody shows that earlier and takes hold of that earlier, which helps you establish an identity. And when I mean identity, I mean not so much, we're an inside zone team, but identity in like, hey, guys, we're going to battle. We're going to fight. We're going to push. We're going to scrap. We're going to get after it every single day and be that. Because one of the things I'm looking forward to camp, and this isn't really an offense or defense thing, it's both. I cannot wait to see the battles between the O-line and the D-line, because I think this D-line is going to be really good. I'll get into that a little bit more later. Does this offensive line just get dominated all spring like the defensive line did in 2017? And it'll help them make them better. Or do they start to win some of these battles? Like, I think early on in fall camp, I kind of expect the defensive line to kind of dominate, to be honest with you. But I'm hoping that by the middle of fall camp, we start hearing like, hey, this offensive line is starting to do some stuff. Like, they're starting to look pretty good. They're starting to get some movement. That's when you've got a group that's really competing and battling. And if they can have success against this group, running the ball, pass pro, that type of thing, then you've got a chance to be a pretty good football team. Because if this offensive line can handle that defensive line, that means your offensive line is going to be pretty good. Because with all due respect to A&M and Florida State, they may be as good as Notre Dame is up front. I don't know that I would say that they're better. I know some people will, but I wouldn't. And I think some are more established on the edge for sure. Neither of those teams are as good as I believe Notre Dame is up the middle. And so, and if some of the breakouts happen that I talked about in my intel pieces yesterday, then I think this Notre Dame defensive line could actually produce. When I say as good as anybody, I'm more referring to talent. It's not as productive, certainly, especially in the edge as other units. But I'm saying from a talent standpoint, I don't think this D-line takes a backseat to anybody this offensive line is going to face. So they can handle this group. Then you start feeling good about how they're going to be able to handle A&M, Florida State, Louisville, USC, teams like that. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing that from the Notre Dame offensive line. Last thing for me on the offense, is I want to see the playmakers making plays, man. Like, I want to see Chris Mitchell start to make some plays. Like, I know what he did on film. He made a huge play on the first day of spring practice last year and then didn't see a whole lot from him after that, mainly because we just didn't see a whole lot, period, right? But, when we were out there, he didn't do a whole lot in the Jersey scrimmage. He caught that blown coverage touchdown late in the blue gold game, which was nice to see, but you just want to see a little bit more from him. That's part of him growing the offense. What's Bo Collins going to look like as a transfer and the boundary? How quickly is he going to pick things up? I had some intel on him yesterday. Did him and Riley Leonard connect at all? What does Jaden Greathouse look like? Is he built on what he did this summer? Or, I mean, in the spring, I should say. How's Jordan Faison look now that he's away from lacrosse and now focused on football? Is Jaden Thomas going to be healthy? What's KK Smith look like? What do the freshmen look like? There's so many things to be excited about with this receiver. Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, Keedron Young. I can't wait to see Keedron Young healthy. There's so many playmakers. You want to see them making plays early, right? Like, the talent is there, but eventually the talent has to turn into results. And you want to see that because one of the things that has me the most fired up about this team, and I just got into it in the O-line, D-line, but it's also true here. I'll give you a little tidbit that's on the intel piece. Talking to folks that are somehow connected to the Notre Dame defense. Last couple years, 2 years ago, there was concerns about how were they really being challenged in practice, the way they need to be ready to play against some of the better receiving corps on Saturdays. Last year, the competition was better, but it still wasn't great. They still largely dominated. One of the things I heard from multiple sources on defense is that this spring and summer, it has been a much more back and forth battle. Now, I would imagine part of that's because there's no Benjamin Morrison. But the other part of it is that this receiving core is just better. I've heard it's a lot faster, and this isn't from people that are connected to the offenses, people connected to the defense. A lot faster, a lot more playmakers, make the defense work a lot harder. I want to see that, right? It's those are words right now. I want to see that. And, I can't wait to see it. I'm excited to see it. I want to see those guys stepping up and making plays in the spring or in the summer. I want to see those battles between Christian Gray and the Notre Dame receivers and hopefully eventually Benjamin Morrison and the Notre Dame receivers and Jaden Mickey and the receivers and, Xavier Watts against the slots and the tight ends and all those things. I'm so excited, to see those battles and especially with Benjamin out. You do think the receiver should win some of those battles, right? If Benjamin's not, and I don't know how much he's going to play at the beginning of fall camp. I have no clue. But if he's not playing as much, that should result in some success there, right? I want to see Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price giving their linebackers fits and one-on-ones. I want to see those things. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing kind of who this group can be and what they're capable of and go out there and perform that way. So those are some of the aspects that I'm looking for from the Notre Dame offense as we go into fall camp. So when you ask about, what am I looking for? What am I watching? What are my takeaways? I try to watch everything, but these are things that I think I'm really going to say, this is where my focus is going to be. It's going to be here. So that's it for the offense. We're going to get to the defense next. But before we do, folks, do me a favor. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. I'd greatly appreciate that very, very much. And if you have not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. As I said earlier, if you do sign up and, you try to log in and it doesn't let you log in, don't try to re-sign up again. You probably didn't do something wrong. It's an issue that we're working through. We're hoping to have it fixed in the next week. Unfortunately, my wife is out of town right now. And she is my tech person, and so it's going to be interesting to see kind of how quickly we can get that fixed. But I can do it manually. I can fix it manually. So just let me know, and I'll be able to kind of go get it fixed and get you squared away, and get you on the boards because there's some really, really good intel over there that I think you all will like and enjoy. And I'm looking forward to seeing some new folks sign up. We've even had some people sign up during the show. So I always appreciate that and get that fired up. So I appreciate y'all very, very much for that. I did have a super chat that I wanted to get to. This is one thing from AST12321. They did say, what do we need to see from CJ Carr this fall to know he's on pace to be the future of Notre Dame football versus what do you want to see from Riley Leonard now? It's really kind of the same thing, honestly. you expect Riley to have a more firm grasp of things and to look a little sharp. But honestly, if CJ is the player that I think he's going to be, you're just going to see him show a more and more and more of a grasp of what they're trying to do. And hopefully that means they give him some opportunities against the twos and the ones at times to kind of show himself against them. But it's really just about build on what you did this spring with CJ Carr. It's like, look, you'd see CJ hitting those backside digs. You'd see CJ going to his second, third read. Whenever the defense made a mistake, CJ made him pay. You blow coverage, you don't have good technique, I'm going at you. I mean, if you don't get enough depth on your zone drop, I'm going to put it right over top of you into the sideline for completion. You want to see that? You want to see him speed up his process a little bit. He's making it, but sometimes it's like, okay, make it a second faster. And just the overall level of mental consistency that you want to see from him. That's really what CJ needs to show this spring or this fall in camp if you're going to feel like he's the heir apparent. But look, you're not going to know by the end of fall camp that, oh, yeah, CJ Carr's that guy. You're going to say, okay, I feel he has the talent to be that guy, and he took big strides. But at the end of the day, he's still a freshman going through his first fall camp. And so you need to understand he's going to have plenty of freshman moments in his first fall camp. And that doesn't mean that he's not the guy. It just means he's a freshman. But you want to see that steady, growth overall. Now, true growth in fall camp is more like this. It's like there's days where you're not quite as good. You're climbing, but you start here, you end here. That's the point, right? And I guess since the way you guys are looking, I should kind of go here. You start here and you end here. And that's what matters. So if there's some of this on the way up, that's okay. That's natural. That's going to happen. But you're still, if you take a step back one day, you take 2 steps forward the next day, that kind of thing, as the opposite of what people normally say. And that's what I want to see from CJ. That's what I want to see from Kenny as well, and as he tries to battle for this position as well. So I thank you for your super chat. Appreciate that. And certainly excited to see, kind of what's going to happen next. I know this is too much to ask for some of you, but could you guys remotely try to actually talk about football in the show, in the chat, please? It's very distracting when I'm trying to, talk about Notre Dame and I've got to monitor the chat because I have no clue. You guys talking about bombings. I mean, guys, come on. Seriously, some people that are supposed to be OGs and stuff, come on, guys. Notre Dame starts fall camp tomorrow. I'm trying to be excited about this and whatever. All right, let's get to the defense and what I want to see from the defense this year, because I mean, then to really, when you think about it, what's the one thing that most of us think we know about this team? I think most of us know, there may be questions that we have, okay, who's going to be here? Who's going to be there? Who's going to start at Mike? Who's going to start at, Viper? Who's going to start at safety? Who's going to start opposite Benjamin Morse? I mean, those are all questions we have, but there's, at least for me, and I'm speaking for me, I'm be curious what you guys think, people who actually want to talk about Notre Dame football in the chat of a Notre Dame football show, curious what you guys think about this. But I still feel yes, there's things we don't know about this team, and yes, there's things we want to learn, and I'm going to talk about some of those things in this show, but there's no, I have no lack of confidence this defense, at the very least, isn't going to be equal to what it was last year. Now, there's going to be areas where they're better than they were last year, areas where maybe they're not quite as good as they were last year. Your team always evolves. But when you just kind of look at the overall results, they're going to at least be what they were last year. I have the utmost confidence they're going to at least continue what they've been doing. The question then becomes, okay, but can they be better? And can they be better in certain areas? Can they be better big picture? Can they be better in big games? Can they be better in some big moments? And as good as this defense was last year, there were some moments where maybe they weren't as good as they needed to be. And that's going to be true of everybody. It just was highlighted more with this defense last year because of the issues on offense. Because when the defense wasn't perfect, they were in the big games, it would cost them. it would cost some chances at victory. So I believe that there's like the floor for the defense is here, the floor for the offense is here. Like, I just know that this defense is going to be really good. The question is can it get to its ceiling? That's going to be, to me, something that I look at and say, when I think about what I'm interested in fall camp, it's the position battles and all that, which we'll get into, but it's more of, does this defense raise its level of play compared to last year? When you look at the areas where they were good but can be better, and I don't mean like sacks. I don't mean that. I don't mean run defense, yards per game. I mean more of just overall effectiveness. If the sacks don't go up compared to last year, but at the end of the year, you look and say, you had 30 more hits on the quarterback. So, like, the number of pressures are the same as they were a year ago. The number of sacks are the same as they were a year ago. But instead of having – actually, let me just look it up, and I'll give you just an actual example when you look at the Notre Dame defense. So if you look at, like, Pro Football Focus numbers from last year, and the Notre Dame defense in 2022 had a total of 225 pressures and 84 hits on the quarterback. So that's sacks plus hits. Then you look at the 2023 defense, and it was a lot more effective. They had 267 total pressures, and they went up to 92 total sacks plus hits on the quarterback. So then they had 175 hurries, 53 pressure or hits, 39 sacks. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that Notre Dame's total pressures is still only 267, which is actually pretty good. And I did a statistical breakdown of this. I can't remember if it was for a show or if it was for the board, but it was something like if you gave the defense the same number of pass plays that they faced as like UCLA and Michigan and Georgia, they would have been far superior to those teams in total pressures. I think them and Ohio State were like had the same number of pass snaps last year where they could have accumulated, but a lot of others, Notre Dame was well behind those teams when it came to just the number of pass plays that they faced. And when you look at their pressure numbers for the number of sacks, they were very good. So, for example, as I said, Notre Dame and Ohio State, I believe, had the same number of pass snaps faced last year. I believe it was something like 472, something like that. I have to go back and look at the number again. But Ohio State last year had 204 pressures. Notre Dame had 267. Ohio State had 62 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. Notre Dame had 92. So they were actually a very disruptive defense last year. So I don't even necessarily need to see the total pressures get better. But if the defense can come out and say, instead of 92 hits on the quarterback, they get that up to like 120, even if the number of sacks don't change. But let's say the number of total pressures or total hits gets up to 120 or 110. There's a significant jump to where you're finishing better. So last year, you'd get a hurry on the quarterback. He'd throw it away. He'd throw it into the ground. He'd scramble away and run. Now, instead of those being hurries, you're now hitting him and getting to him and knocking him down, which then results in more breakups, more turnovers, and just the quarterback just eventually getting a little bit, I don't want to get hit anymore. And he starts leading into some mistakes down the road. So it may not be a thing now, but eventually in the fourth quarter, you hit him enough, he's just going to start saying, I don't want to get hit anymore. I'm just going to get the ball out. And that's something that they're going to need to do more of this year is finish better. So it's not necessarily like the total number of pressures needs to get better. It's like get better at rushing the quarterback. Well, I think they were very disruptive at rushing the quarterback last year. But what I want to see is them get home more. So you don't pressure the quarterback, but you hit the quarterback. That's an area where they can get better. They don't need to necessarily become a better quote-unquote pass rushing team from a sacks or total pressure standpoint, but more impactful pressures. I don't need to see them get more, breakups than they did last year. It'd be nice if they did, but it's okay. Are they coming? Are they more in some of the bigger moments? So, like, look, you were great against Ohio State for 56 minutes, but the last 4 minutes, you couldn't get home to the quarterback when you needed to, and you couldn't get to the ball. You couldn't turn the ball over when you had opportunities. You couldn't execute when you needed and you had opportunities. It's like, can you be better in those moments? Those are the questions that I look at and say, hey, if they can be better there, then, even though the overall numbers here don't change a whole lot. So Notre Dame was pretty good at forcing fumbles next year. Can they get better at forcing fumbles this year and then recovering them? Those are all parts of who this team is that you say can get better than it was last year. It's not exponentially better. It's the Ohio State game. You had 2 plays. If you could take back and just make one of them different, you win that football game. If DJ Brown catches that pick on the last drive, and if Ramon Henderson properly plays the seam route on the third 19, if you just do one of those 2 things correctly, and there's tons of other plays I could point to, but just those 2. So the point is, you're not a million miles away from, you're good, but you're way away from being dominant. I'm talking about just a couple plays here and there, where if the defense can just do this, they're going to be significantly better when it comes to the end result. And that's what I want to see if this defense can get to. So, like, big picture, that's what I'm kind of looking to see from the Notre Dame defense. So let's talk specifics. Number 1, how is the defense going to be different? And Al Golden is not going to go out there this summer and go visit a bunch of NFL teams and other college teams and say, okay, we're going to run a completely new defense this year. How are we going to be different? It's not that. It's more so looking internally. Okay, last year we had this personnel. This year we have this personnel. Some of the things we did last year we can't do this year because we don't have this player. Even something as simple as like, hey, look, we could put 5 different checks into a play based on motion because we knew J.D. Bertrand could figure out which of those 5 checks he needed to get to. Or, hey, we may only do 3 of those checks this year with Drake Bowen because he's a sophomore still on the defense. That's something simple like that. Hey, our field corner last year was great. Cam Hart was great. He was great at this. We love our field corners this year, but they're not great at that. They're great at this. And so you have to evolve what you're going to be defensively. Hey, we were, as a defense, looking at it from a coaching standpoint, hey, we were really good at getting pressure up the middle with our defensive tackles and our linebackers. Okay, well, maybe this year you feel better about what you can do off the edge, whether it be linebacker pressures, whether it be defensive end pressures. And so if you feel like you're getting more production from the edge, because you didn't get a lot last year, okay, well, what does that do to your defense? Do you trigger your linebackers more? Do you trigger your linebackers less? Do you change your coverage structure? If all of a sudden you're better here than maybe you were last year because your personnel's different. And that's all part of the evolution of your defense. So Al Golden's founding principles aren't going to change this year. They're not. He is who he is. You've got 2 stud defensive tackles coming back. You've got Jack Kaiser coming back. You've got Xavier Watson, All-American, coming back. You got Benjamin Morrison coming back. You got a lot of guys that played last year coming back. But your defense is going to be different. And it's not going to be noticeably like huge differences, but there's going to be differences. And I'm looking forward in fall camp to seeing what those are going to be. And then also some of it is Al Golden making changes and adaptations, but then other parts of it it's from a player standpoint. Does Jordan Patelho finally step up this summer or this season? Does the light go on for Christian Gray? Does it go on for Drake Bowen? Does it go on for Don Schuler? What are the transfers going to do in fall camp after getting their feet wet in the spring in the case of RJ Oben and Jordan Clark? Or now this is really your first real taste in regard to Rod Hurd. So those are things too that it's about Al Golden adjusting to the personnel, but the personnel's got to then step up also and say, hey, we're going to be better than we were a year ago. And so those are things that you look at and say, hey, this is where we're at. This is what we're going to do. And this is who we believe this team is going to be. And you start to see that in fall camp. And that's something I'm excited to see. Do you feel like you have more weapons that you can utilize now? Do you feel like you have less that you can utilize now? Those are all things that start to be decided in fall camp. And I'm looking forward to seeing that. Next one is going to be about the D-line. I think, again, and I want to hear what you all think, I believe Notre Dame going into the season has a top 5 defensive line. Even with, people say, well, I don't know about the Vipers. Okay, cool. Don't know about the Vipers either. I'm with you. But they had a top 5 defensive line last year with no production from the Vipers. So I don't know why we would expect a regression. So I feel that it's a very easy thing to say this is a top 5 defensive line going into the season for me. So then the question that I have is, okay, do they stay there like right at 5 or do they jump up? Do they maybe fall down to 6 or 7? Not because they're worse, but because a couple defensive lines pass them. Like, so sometimes, hey, we're just as good as we were last year. We ranked 5th last year. Why are we 7th now? Well, you're 7th now, not because you got worse, because you didn't get better and other people did get better. So maybe that happens, but that's kind of what I want to see from this defense is what is it going to look like? You've got your entire defensive tackle rotation coming back. You've got your entire Viper rotation coming back. You're going to have a brand new group of defensive ends on your roster now. I mean, your entire defensive end depth chart is completely different this year than it was last year. Javonte Jean-Baptiste is gone and Nana's gone. You're replacing them with RJ Oben, who has over 20 career sacks, or actually 20 career tackles for loss, has about 14 sacks in his career. He's played a lot of football under a very good defensive coach under Mike Elko. You've got Josh Burnham stepping into the mix, who's had a great offseason. You've got Bryce Young, who's a 5-star stepping in to the mix. And then what about Viper? We've got Jordan Botelho. What's he going to do? Is he going to finally figure it out? I mean, like Jordan Botelho for me this year is Marist Liufau last year. Like, you guys remember how much we talked about Marist in 2022, and we'd heard so many good things, and people were excited about him, and he was fast, and he was athletic, he was going to be a breakout. There was times he was their best linebacker. I remember hearing all this stuff about Marist, and then you get to the season, and you're just like, that's not the guy that I was told that that was described to me. Just inconsistent, missing tackles, making just boneheaded mistakes, not being where he needed to be. And then he'd flash a couple big plays. You're like, okay, that's the guy you get fired up about. But he was just so inconsistent that we went into last year like, hey, look, what we believed about him last year from a potential standpoint still holds true, but I'm just in show me mode. And that's what, that's kind of what I feel about Jordan Botelho is like, I heard some really interesting things about him. And if you read the intel piece, you'll see what I'm talking about. Like, there's some things to kind of be excited about with him. But I'm at the point now where it's just like, you got to show me. You got to show me. I need to see it. I need to see you do it before I'm going to get too excited about it. And really, the Viper position to me is going to be what determines whether or not this defensive line can really get a lot better. There's certainly some things the D tackles can do to get better. They are not finished products. The defensive end position has more talent this year and more depth, but it's got to prove itself. I mean, I'll say this. I feel a lot better about the defensive end position right now than I did a year ago at this time. Like, right now, we're looking at it from a post-2023 standpoint, right? Where we all know what Javonte Jean-Baptiste did, and he was really good and just clutch. Loved what he brought to the table. Nana was that like super sub. He wasn't like a great all-around player, but man, he was really good at what they asked him to do. And as a duo, they were really, really good. 16 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks. I mean, they were just a really good duo. They weren't dynamic, but they were good. If you go preseason, we didn't see a whole lot of Javonte during the spring. We didn't really know what he was going to be. Looking at how I evaluate the defensive end position now compared to what I was a year ago at this time, not comparing to what they were in 23, but where we thought they were going into 2023, I have far more excitement about what this group can do at defensive end than what I did about last year's group. Now, last year's group outplayed expectations. Can this group play up to expectations or exceed it as well, or will they be a little disappointing? I don't know. We're going to see, but I think we're going to start to see glimpses of that in fall camp. Like, honestly, when you look at the Viper position and some of the things I've heard about Jordan Botelho and some things I've heard about Boubacar Traore and Josh Burnham and Bryce Young and RJ Open, and then you think about the youth and the things you're dealing with at tackle, if the offensive linemen are whipping the defensive line early in fall camp, that might be a problem. You want to see the defensive line handling business early in fall camp. At least I hope that's kind of what we see, because I think this group has a chance to be really good. But it's not going to be like, okay, it's in that 5-ish range. And if I were to move it, I'd say I'd probably move it down a spot or two as opposed to upper spot or two, just because of the fact that I need to see more from the edge players. If the edge gives me what I hope it can be, Notre Dame's not 5. They're talking about being in that conversation for, are they the best defensive line in college football? They're not there now, but they can be. and it's going to really take the edge to be there. And that's what I want to see. You know, I want to see the veterans step up. I want to see Jordan Patel finish his career on a strong note. Like a lot of times as fans, we listen, oh, you know, he hasn't done it by now. Forget it. Move on. Let's see Boubacar, or let's see Burnham, or let's see whoever. And my whole thing is like, well, pump the brakes on that. Yes, I want to see Boubacar, and I want to see Boubacar thrive and excel and be great this year. But they're going to need Jordan Patel too. And they're going to be better as a team if Patel and Boubacar and Junior Tuilamaka are all able to give them really good minutes. Yes, if RJ Oben breaks out, that's great, but they need Oben and Burnham to break out. Or if it's just Burnham breaking out, not Oben. They need both of them to be really good football players, and then let's see what Bryce Young can give you. So at the end of the day, you look at it and say, hey, listen, I think this is what they can be. And it's kind of funny. I'm seeing like people in the chat still talking about like, I'm not sold on this guy. And I'm like, guys, the only people in the country that aren't sold on Riley Mills, for example, being a really good player are Notre Dame fans and people who have never heard of Riley Mills. That's it. Whether it's Pro Football Focus, whether it's NFL scouts, it's like everybody thinks Riley Mills is really, really good except for Notre Dame fans. And I don't understand why that is. Whatever. It is what it is. But they have, in my opinion, the best tackle combo in the football coming back. You have Riley Mills and Howard Cross, and the two Michigan guys are the only two guys, or the only two tandems in all of college football that return two guys that ranked in the top 25 in pass rush production and run production. The only two. And here's the thing about Michigan. The only two from last year. Michigan, it was two different. Michigan, it was, I think Mason Graham was in both, but in one of them, it was Kenneth Grant in one of them, and then the other one, it was Chris Jenkins. So it wasn't the same two guys. Mills and Cross were very, very good players last year for Notre Dame, and I don't understand why people don't think that's the case. It is what it is, but we're going to see if they can kind of step up that next that next level of production. And it's not Mills being better, it's not Cross being better, it's the edge. The edge has to get better, and the depth has to get better. Is what I'm hearing about Onye legit? Is Rubio locked in? Is Heinisch, a year older, year stronger? Is Donovan ready to really give you some really good snaps up there to take some of that burden off of Mills and Cross? We're going to find out. But at the end of the day, this D-line is going to be very good. The question is how good, and I'm excited to see that. And I know that's going to sound weird coming from an offensive guy, because I'm looking at it and like I really think this D-line is going to be really good, coming back, and I'm looking forward to seeing if they're able to put it all together and be that early on. Now, another thing I'm looking at is the secondary has a lot to figure out, right? A lot to figure out. Is Benjamin Morrison going to be healthy? If not, what does the secondary look like? Does Christian Gray get snaps in the boundary? If Benjamin can't go early, how does that impact his battle on the field position? Jordan Clark, we expect to be the starting rover. Who's his number two? Is it going to just be, starting nickel? Who's the number two going to be? Is it going to be just a linebacker, so they just do more of the base defense? It's a Jaden Osbury, Jalen Snead type. Is there another nickel that steps up? Is it Rod Hurd at times? Is it another player stepping up? What's the rotation going to look like at safety? Is Rod Hurd going to start opposite Xavier Watts? Is it a Don Shula that's going to start opposite Xavier Watts? They're both going to play. What's the rotation look like? What do they provide from a coverage standpoint? Can they make more plays in the pass game than last year? Can Jaden Mickey and Christian Gray go from, okay, this is what they were, last year as rotation guys, to now can they be that good as starters, as full-time guys? Those are the things that you have to find out. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to seeing. So just some of the comments today are killing me. It is really funny that a Notre Dame defense that is as good as it was, that has a D-line that like literally everyone views as a top 10 defensive line, everybody except for some Notre Dame fans. It's hilarious. But it is what it is. But they've got to obviously to go out there and be even better. But I really want to see how the secondary shapes itself out this year. And what exactly does the makeup of it look like? We know all the players, like we know everyone that's going to be involved in secondary, but we don't necessarily know where the pieces are going to fit, what kind of rotation we're going to see, who plays how much, and then how productive they're going to be. Was last year's great pass game production a fluke? Was it just who they are? Is Xavier Watts a guy that can build on what he did last year, or was it just kind of that fluky year? We had a great half of a year. Can Benjamin Morrison be healthy? There's so many questions about the secondary that we need to see answered this fall. And it's not so much questions like, are they going to be good or not? Again, we're past that, guys. We're past the standard of are they going to be good or not. Like, if you're still having a conversation about is Notre Dame going to be good on defense, or is the secondary going to be good? Is the D-line going to be good? You're like 5 years late. You're still arguing about stuff that's like from the Brian Van Gorder era. Like we're not talking present day football anymore. We're not having the same conversation about the same team. You're off in like la la land, still thinking that because Notre Dame hasn't won a title, they're not good at something. Like, this defense is really good. It's not about are they going to be good. The conversation isn't about are they going to have one of the top 10 defenses in college football. Do they have one of the 10 best defensive lines in college football, or that they're not going to have one of the 10 best secondaries in college football? They will. But are they 10th? Are they 7th? Are they 5th? Are they second? Are they number 1? Like, those are all questions that have to get answered this spring or this in fall camp, because of how guys perform, how guys stay healthy. There's so many of those questions that have to get answered, and how well they get answered is going to tell us a lot about how good this football team is going to be. And that's something that I'm very excited about with this team, and something I'm very excited to see in fall camp. But I'll be honest, the secondary, just because of the injury of Benjamin Morrison, does have me a little bit concerned about if he can't practice, does that stunt the development of Christian Gray as a field corner? It'll help Christian Gray grow in regard to him being the heir apparent to Benjamin Morrison in the boundary, but does this stunt his growth there? That's something that we're going to see. And I'm very curious to see if they're able to perform at an elite level that allows them to once again have a top 5 pass defense. Or are they going to be 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, somewhere around there? And that's something we're going to see too. And then the last thing on defense, and this is one that I think you guys are going to be excited about as well. Will youth be served on defense this year? I can't wait. I mean, look, it's kind of like, I know what Riley Mills is. Can he be better? Sure. Can Howard Cross be better? Sure. Can Jack Kaiser be better? Sure. Can Benjamin Morrison, Dave Ross be better? Yeah, sure. Everybody can always get better. But it's kind of like, I'm not really paying attention a lot to Riley Mills. Like, I promise you guys, I will be paying very little attention in practice tomorrow to Xavier Watts or Howard Cross or Benjamin Morrison, or if he's other than, okay, he's practicing, woohoo, Riley Mills, Jack Kaiser, Jordan Clark. I'm not going to be paying attention to those guys, to be honest with you, because I know there's at least a floor there that I'm comfortable with. What's really going to determine if this defense can really take that next step, to me, in my opinion, is if the young players really grow up in a hurry. And can Boubacar, Josh Burnham, Bryce Young, Drake Bowen, Kingston Viliama-Asa, Jaden Osbury, Christian Gray, Don Schuler, Luke Talich, can those, and I'm missing some, but just off the top of my head, like those type of players, how good are they going to be? The opportunity's there. Drake Bowen's going to play. Kingston's going to play. Jaden Osbury's going to play. Jalen Sneed's going to play. Christian Gray, Don Schuler, they're going to play. Boubacar's going to play. Josh Burnham's going to play. Bryce Young is going to play. That's not a question. It's not about, gee, are they going to get a chance to play? They're going to play. They're going to get a lot of reps in fall camp. The question is, can they be difference makers? Can they, as a group, step up and really show you that next level ability? Because here's the reality of the Notre Dame defense. They lost some very good, experienced football players. Outside of Cam Hart, I don't believe they lost any elite football players or talents. I think Cam was. I think Cam should have been drafted much higher than he was. But you look at Javonte Jean-Baptiste, really solid veteran player. Nana, really solid veteran player. J.D. Bertrand and Maris Leofau were very good football players. They weren't like elite athletes, pound for pound maybe, but they weren't 6'3", 240, long, and athletic. They were both athletic. J.D. was on the shorter side. Marist, more long and athletic, but not quite as instinctive. You lose DJ Brown. You lose Ramon Henderson. You lose Thomas Harper, good football player. But you didn't lose a Bryant Young. You didn't lose a Kyle Hamilton. You didn't lose a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah outside of maybe Cam Hart. You didn't lose a Stephon Tuitt, a Manti, a Harrison Smith. And these guys that were very important players. DJ Brown was a very important player to Notre Dame last year. Loved what he did last year. And I was talking with somebody the other day. I was like, I hate the fact that when people think back to DJ's last year, they're going to think of the missed tackle in Louisville and they're going to think of the dropped interception against Ohio State. And that's all they're going to remember. They're not going to remember that DJ outside of that was a really solid football player last year. But the reality is I can say that in one breath and also say that when you lose the guys I just mentioned, outside of Cam, you are replacing them with significantly better athletes and significantly more talent. Love J.D. Bertrand. Love Maris Leofau. With all due respect, this is going to be a longer, more athletic defense this year than it was last year. Love DJ Brown. Like, I have so much respect for what that kid overcame and how he played and all that type of stuff from last year. But they're just going to be more athletic and more talented. Adon Schuler's got more talent. Rod Hurd's got more talent and more athleticism. They're thicker. They run better. Right? I love Javonte. Love Nana. So thankful for what they did last year. But Josh Burnham and R.J. Oben or Bryce Young are just way more talented. They just are. You know, look, Viper, you've got two guys coming back that are played a lot, but the reality is the two most talented guys in the room on that position at Viper are Boubacar and Logan Thomas. That's who it is. So will the youth be served? So Kingston Viliama-Asa is a freaky talent. I mean, I use the word freak so often in my intel piece yesterday that I'm like, I'd love to use another term, but this is the words that are being given to me by multiple people. It's not just like one guy using that word over and over again. It's multiple people about different players. And you get to the point where like, boy, this is a chance to me to say, okay, yes, you're going to be younger and less experienced, but will the youth step up and provide impact play? That's the question. Will the youth come up and say, hey, listen, I may not be as experienced as J.D. Bertrand, and I may not be the leader yet that J.D. Bertrand was, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be big and fast and athletic. That's what I'm going to do. I mean, that's who we're going to be. I may not be as experienced as DJ Brown. I'm not a 6th-year senior, if you're a Don Schuler, but you know what? I'm bigger, I'm faster, I'm more athletic. I'm going to hit. I'm a student of the game. I'm going to go make a bunch of plays. I know there's two veterans in front of me at Viper, but I'm Boubacar Traore, and I'm just going to go out there and ball out and let my talent take over. Like, those are the things that I'm excited to see. Is the most elite talent that they have on this roster is redshirt sophomores, and freshmen. That's just the reality of it. It's Josh Burnham on down. It's Burnham. It's Boubacar. It's Bryce Young. I mean, if you think about if this defensive line has future day 1, day 2 NFL draft picks on the edge, it's not Jordan Pataho. It's not R.J. Oben. It's not Junior Telemaka. Those are good football players. It's Boubacar. It's Josh Burnham. It's Bryce Young. If the linebacker is going to have a day 1 or day 2 draft pick in the next 3 or 4 years, it's probably not Jack Kaiser, although I'd love if that happened. It's going to be Drake or Kingston or Jaden Alsbury or Jalen Snead, somebody like that. It's not going to be those guys. If you look in the secondary, right? I mean, outside of Xavier Watts, most of your talent's going to be on the younger side in the secondary, right? I mean, Benjamin Morrison's only a junior. I mean, he's not even that veteran player, but he's the second veteran of that group as far as returners. The rest of it's a bunch of young pups that may not be as experienced, but have loads of talent. And so those are all things that you look at and say, the most freaky athletes that they have on this team are the young players. How much will that impact this team? I don't know the answer to that, but how many of them and here's the thing, Notre Dame has enough depth that they don't have to play all those young. They don't have to play Bryce Young. They don't have to play Boubacar. They don't have to play Logan Thomas. They don't have to play all of the young linebackers I mentioned. They don't have to play Christian Gray all the time. He can just be a rotation guy. They don't have to play a Don Schuler a bunch. He can just be a rotation guy. None of those guys outside of maybe Drake Bowen have to play. But if they do, it's because they've earned it. And if they've earned it, it's going to make this defense really, really scary for opposing teams and exciting to watch for Notre Dame fans. And we're going to find out in fall camp just how good that group can be. And that's one of the things I'm excited about seeing this season. So that's going to wrap it up for the what to look for section. I'm going to talk about some coaching stuff next in the final section. So but before we do, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review if you're listening via your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or other partners. And if you've not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, final section of today's show. I'm going to take two coaches on both sides of the ball that I think will be most impactful on the season. And I'm just talking strictly on the field, practice, games, stuff like that. I'm not talking recruiting. This is just coaching the team up. So two guys on both sides of the ball that I think are going to have the biggest impact on how good this team is going to be. I'm not talking coordinators or head coach. I'm talking position coaches, assistant coaches. I'm going to begin on offense, and I'm going to start with Joe Rudolph. Like, this is a big, big year for Joe Rudolph. I would argue that no position coach on the team has as much on his shoulders right now as Joe Rudolph. And some will say Al Washington or Mike Brown. I don't agree with that. I think Al Washington already put a top 10 defense on the field last year, defensive line on the field. He's proven he can do that so far. Although I will talk about Al Washington a little bit. I don't think he is that number one at the top guy. I don't think it's Mike Brown. I think it's right here with Joe Rudolph because Joe Rudolph did not put a very good offensive line on the field last year at times. But overall, it was a disappointing line. It was a line that got their butts kicked by Duke. They got their butts kicked by Louisville. And they got their butts kicked in the second half against Clemson. 3 of your biggest games of the year, you got your butts kicked. Now, yeah, great. They played well against Ohio State. But that was negated by how awful they were the next 2 games. And there were some things in the run game, like, they're running – super counters and all these things just nonstop, just all the time. And I answer to a degree, it's Audric was good at running that stuff, but like, it just was not a good situation where you just didn't feel comfortable looking at this team and saying like, hey, they should be doing this based on the talent of the line. There were a lot of things that were frustrating with that line last year. And this year, they're just going to have to get better. They're going to have to be a lot better. And they're going to have to be better with a much younger and less experienced offensive line. You don't have Joe Walt anymore. You don't have Blake Fisher anymore. You don't have Zeke Carell anymore. You're going to be a much younger offensive line, much less experienced offensive line. But you're also going to have a lot of talent. And when you have the talent to be good, you need to get to that point. You need to say, okay, yes, we're going to have some ups and downs, but there's going to be more ups than there are downs. And as the season goes on, again, it's like when I talked about earlier, that curve it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to look a little bit like this. But at the end of the day, you start here, you finish here. That's what matters. And last year, we didn't see that. Matter of fact, last year, they didn't start really putting like back-to-back-to-back good games together until you were missing multiple starters from your offensive line because of injuries. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. And you've got to grow up in a hurry. Like somebody in the chat asked, wasn't Clemson a all freshman last year? But again, go look at how bad their offensive line was the first month and a half, 2 months of the season. Notre Dame can't afford to go through that. Notre Dame can't afford for their offensive line to figure it out the week that they play Notre Dame in November. They've got to figure out, because by then you will have already played Texas A&M, you'll have already played Louisville, you'll have already played Georgia Tech, and you might have already played Florida State. You've got to figure it out in a hurry. And it's up to Joe Rudolph to get that going. It's up to Joe Rudolph to do really three things. Obviously you've got to figure out your position battles. But number one, this team has to be a lot tougher. This offensive line physically did not play with the demeanor that they needed to last year. Even when they were good, even when they were blocking against Ohio State, even when they were blocking for a bunch of yards against Stanford and Oregon State, they didn't play with the demeanor of the past great Notre Dame offensive lines. When I think of the 2020 offensive line, when do you think 2017 offensive line, the 2015 offensive line, heck, even the 2012 offensive line had moments like this where they just went out and kicked your butt week after. Even if you outplayed them, it's kind of like this. I can't remember who it was, but somebody told me this is how you describe a Lou Holtz team in the late 80s and early 90s. You may beat them, but you're walking away from that fight with a limp. You're taking some blows. You may, at the end of the day, beat Notre Dame under Lou Holtz, but you weren't going to be the same team coming out of that game because you were going to get fought. They were going to fight you. They're going to beat you up. I'm talking about within the football standpoint. They were going to come after you hard. They were going to brawl. It was going to be a 60-minute all-out battle. And maybe you win at the end of the day, but you're limping out of this fight. And you're bloodied coming out of this fight. Last year's Notre Dame offensive line wasn't that way. It wasn't. And that's a coaching thing. And now hopefully Mike Denbrock does his part by giving them to allow by forcing this to be more of a zone team. Okay? I hope that's the case. But they've got to let this group get back to being physical. They have to let this group get this group to be, hey, listen, not get back to be. They need to get this group to be physical, to play with attitude, to come out there and say, hey, listen, this is our field, and I don't care where the game is played. It's their field. And we're going to fight you, and we're going to kick your butt for 60 minutes. And that's just the mindset that was severely lacking last year. Now, to a degree, it's understandable. It's year one. It's a new look line. You've got no starters at guard. You've got new run game concepts you're implementing. There's just a lot of things that were different. So I'm willing to give them a pass, but I'll say it is concerning. And and look, the D line may whip you early because they, more experienced, whatever, but you better fight. You better fight every day. And when I say fight, I'm not talking about fighting like punches, and I'm talking about within the scope of football. You better battle your butt off. Hey, you got me today, but I'm coming back at you tomorrow. And when you get your butt kicked in practice, I don't want to see, here's when I hate fights in practice. I hate fights that a guy's just kicking your butt for an entire game or not entire practice, and then you get all mad and you want to throw blows and you get all up in your feelings, and we got to break it up and all. That's football. But then if I don't see you come out that next snap and just go hard, then what happened is you don't have pride. You got your feelings hurt, right? The difference between a coach who's in his feelings and the difference between a coach who is absolutely dominant is let me say this again. The difference between an offensive line and an offensive lineman who is got pride or an offensive lineman who's kind of emotional is how you react when a guy's kicking your butt nonstop and talking trash to you. And both may result in pushing and shoving in a fight in practice. I don't condone it, but it happens. But what do you do coming out of that determines who you really are. If you fight with a guy and then you're just kind of crap the rest of practice and you don't actually come back, then you're not my guy. But if you don't fight a guy, like brawl, right, but you come back that next day and you're pissed off and you go out there and kick his butt every snap, that tells me something. Like Lewis Nix as a freshman at Notre Dame was not ready to play football at Notre Dame. He wasn't. He was way overweight. He just was not ready physically to play. But I knew as a freshman that someday Lewis Nix is going to be a dude. And I'll tell you why. There was a day in fall camp. We were at practice. This is his freshman year. And Braxton Cave is just kicking Lewis's butt. Lewis is on scout team, and Lewis walks off the field. And Brian Kelly, and this kudos to Brian Kelly for this, Brian Kelly rips Lewis Nix in front of the whole team and forces him to be back on the field. Now, Lewis is clearly in his feelings, but what's he going to do about it? They bring Lewis back, and I love this kid, and so sad that he's not with us anymore. But Lewis on that next play, after Kelly brings it back on the field, comes off the line, hits Braxton Cave so hard he lifts him basically off the ground, gets him on his heels, drives him back into the quarterback, and plants him. I said, okay, that kid's going to be something someday. Because he got embarrassed. He got his butt kicked by Braxton Cave, and he got chewed out in front of the whole team. How's he going to respond? This is what I talk about mental toughness. What did Lewis do? He got back in there and said, okay, I'm going to show you. And he kicked Braxton's butt on that next rep. I want to see guys on the offensive line that if the defensive line kicks your butt one day in practice, you better come out that next day. And I'm not talking about fighting. I'm not talking about come next day and you're getting chippy after. I don't care about that. That doesn't win you football games. That gets you 15-yard penalties. I'm talking about you come out that next day, and when you're running the football, you are just blasting them. You're giving them everything you got because you're pissed that you got embarrassed the day before. That's what I want to see. And honestly, we didn't see that last year. The way that the O-line, like if Harry Heastand would have ever had an O-line get their butts physically kicked the way that they got kicked against Duke, and I never saw Harry Heastand's offensive line get kicked like that. I promise you, the next week, that I would have felt terrible for the defensive line they'd have faced the next week. Terrible. Because that defensive line the next week would have got dominated, destroyed. Because they would have come out with such a sense of pride and pride of themselves, the tradition, all of that, that they would have said, no, we're never doing that again. And to watch this offensive line come out that next week and basically be just as bad said something to me like this line doesn't have the demeanor. They don't have the attitude to be a great line. They don't even have the demeanor to be consistently a good line because they don't have the fight. As a unit, now not every player wasn't that same way, but as a unit, they weren't that way. And that's got to change. Like that is the biggest thing that I need to see from this group is I want to see some fight. And honestly, it's the coach that instills that and instills it the right way. And fight again does not mean get in a fight. Somebody said, I don't care about that. I don't care that after play, you push a guy or rip his helmet off or get in a shoving match. I don't care about all that. Like I don't need any of that in practice. If it happens, it happens as part of fall camp. But I don't need. It doesn't tell me you're tough. It doesn't. You get into a shoving match when you got pads on. It doesn't tell me you're a tough guy. It tells me you're emotional. That's what it tells me. What tells me you're a tough guy is after that, you come back that next play and you kick that guy's butt on the next rep. Or you come back with a sense of pride that I'm going to give you everything I got, right? And I love guys like that. Like, hey, you may beat me, but I promise you, you're not going to enjoy this win. Because you're going to be in so much physical pain afterwards. And again, I'm talking, you guys get what I'm saying, right? The hyperbole I'm using. You're not going to enjoy this win. You may beat me, but man, it's like, hey, Apollo won, right? Like Rocky won, Apollo won, split decision at the end, right? You think Apollo felt good coming out of no, he was in the hospital with Rocky. You know what I'm saying? Like you may win the fight, but I promise you, you're not going to feel good afterwards because I'm coming with you with everything I got. I'm playing hard. I'm playing great leverage. I'm driving my feet. I'm trying to put you on the ground. We're trying to dominate. And I cannot wait to see if we see that from this line or not. They should. Talent's there. Because here's the thing. They may not know all the plays. They may not have an advanced repertoire. Their technique may not always be there because there's a group of young players. But you know what you don't need experience to be? Tough. You don't need experience in college. You don't need 30 career starts to be tough. You don't need 30. Now, Robert Hainsey in 2017, he wasn't strong. He wasn't strong like you will be when he was a senior. But you know what he was? He was tough. Tommy Kramer in 2017, he was a redshirt freshman. He didn't play it at all in 2016. But you know what he was? He was tough. He would fight you. He would battle you. Now, again, in the right form. That's what I need to see. Charles Jagasaw doesn't need 2 more years of experience to be tough. Billy Schrauth doesn't need 10 more starts under his belt to be tough. Don't need that. It's you either have it, you don't. It's either instilled or it's not. It's either demanded or it's not. And that's what Joe Rudolph is in front of him. Now, all the other things are important, right? So the toughness is something I need to see. I need to see this line with Joe Rudolph do a better job of moving their feet through contact. There was way too much hit and stop last year. And the third thing I need to see is this group has to get a lot better at using their hands. And there's way too many body blockers last year. And guys would play in hand placement. There's a time and a place for hand placement. But there needs to be some violence involved in how they use their hands in ways that we did not see last year. And I want to see much more of that. And it ties into number one, because if number one is there, then you're going to see that naturally manifest itself in this way. And so those are the things that I want to see from Coach Rudolph this year. And here's the deal. And here's why he is numero uno on this list. If his line does well in all three of those areas, they play with great toughness. They play with great technique. They move their feet, right? Then guess what they're going to do? They're going to come out and be really good, and the rest of the offense follows. Now, if the receivers are really good and the running backs are really good and the quarterbacks are pretty good, but the offensive line gets their butts kicked by the A&M D line, doesn't matter that all those things are good. It's not a 7-on-7 game. Doesn't matter as much as those things are good. It can be neutralized because they got dominated up front. And that's why I say that group is way more important than any other group that you have on offense. And I would argue on the entire team. And because I would even say, if you look at the D-line, we know what the D-line can do. The question is, will the D-line be challenged in a way that makes them better? Does the O-line come out and play with them? Because I remember last year watching the offensive line in practice, and it was one of the open practices we were at. The D-line were just mocking the offensive line the whole practice. Just talking trash to Blake Fisher, talking trash to the whole line. And the O-line would get like a little salty and do some shoving afterwards, but they just kept getting their butt kicked. They didn't do anything about it. They just kept getting their butts kicked. Snap after snap after snap after snap. Just kept getting their butt kicked. There was no digging deep to say, nope, no more of this. We're coming off this next play. Hey, coach, can we just run duo on this next play? I don't care. Sometimes you need to have that kind of leadership. Like Quentin Nelson, I guarantee you has done this before. Hey, coach, run inside zone right here because we're just coming out and we're just going to, we're going to do something here. I want to see that. Hey, Billy Schrouth, I want to see, hey, coach, and just freaking call duo. Right, call inside zone right now. And get in his line face. Hey, listen, come off this freaking ball. And you better blast these dudes. You know what I mean? There needs to be that. They didn't have that fight last year as a unit. Some guys here and there, but as a unit. And I want to see that. And that plays into everything else. And if we see that, this line is going to be really, really, this offensive line is going to be really good. And this offense is going to be scary good. All right. Next position coach on offense that is going to have a huge impact on the season is Mike Brown. I'm going to have an article coming out later today on irishbreakdown.com that's going to build on this a little bit more. But for all the talk about the recruiting for Mike Brown, and it's got to get better, okay? It's got to get better. When you look at what he does best, why he was hired, it's for this period right here. Mike Brown, to me, is a guy who I've been very impressed by because I didn't know a lot about Mike Brown when I first heard his name. I've studied it since then. You look at what he did against Cincinnati. You look at how his receivers, even last year at Wisconsin, played with very mediocre talent. And then you look at what he's going to inherit talent-wise in Notre Dame. If he's the coach that I think he can be, you're going to see this receiving core be pretty good. And a lot of it honestly comes down to, yes, technique is important. Knowing your assignments is important. Knowing proper spacing is important. Like something as simple as you're supposed to be 6 yards outside the tackle and you line up at 7 yards outside the tackle. That matters because I'm not where I need to be as quick as I need to be, right? Because I can't all of a sudden run a yard faster. My speed is my speed. So if I'm not lined up properly, then I'm not going to get to where I need to get to at the right time. That's why things like that matter so much. Those things are all important. But what I want to see more of from this group is not just that. It's not just, be technically proficient. I want to see that. I want to see some fight in this receiving core. I want to see, one thing that I liked some of the things I saw in the spring, But one of the things I did not like is they just didn't compete for the ball. You know what? Fight's not the right word because I just use that with the offensive line. It's more of just a compete level. I want to see a greater compete level from this group. When the ball's in the air, I want them to be hungry to catch the football. When the ball's in the air, I want them to feel like, man, this is my ball. You don't have a right to this ball. This is my ball. And you say, hey, well, you don't have a right to be something. But when somebody invades your space, when they invade hey, no, man, we're pushing back. Right? Like, this is my zone. I'm going to go out there and get it done. And so those are all things that I want to see from this receiving core. I want to see them compete. I fully expect them to come out and be fundamentally sound. I fully expect them to come out and be much better route runners and play a deeper core. But do they really have that deep inside of them as a group that hey, moments on the line, let's go do this. Throw me the ball. I got it. Who steps up and does that? And then as a whole, do they do that? I think Mike Brown's entering a period where you're going to start to see why Marcus Freeman brought him in. Because I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see greater route proficiency. I think you're going to come in, you're going to see situations where, when I look at the receiving core, I look at a group that has been hammered a lot in recent years, and the easy excuse is they just didn't have enough talent. And while they did not have the talent of the top groups, certainly, it was more about, for me, they never got to the point where they played to their potential or close to it. And this group, I think, has a chance to get to that point. When you talk about the type of talent they have at receiver, like somebody just compared it to 2017, somebody who I respect a great deal. I don't think it's even close to 20. It's way different than 2017. Number one, your quarterback's way better passer. But this receiving core is so much better than that. I mean, you're talking about Cam Smith and Freddie Canteen as the transfers in that group. You're talking about now Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins combined for over 1,600 yards last year. And Bo didn't even play the last two games. Like, Jaden Greathouse, when healthy last year, was a really good football player. Jordan Faison. The talent's there. I think they're going to be technically proficient. I think they're going to know what they need to do much better. The question is, even if they're that, will we see them compete for the football? And compete for the football in the moments where the game matters most. That's what I'm curious about. And who does it? Who does it? Who are those guys? Who are those guys to step up in those moments? And a lot of that is the player stepping up. But look, Mike Brown has got to play a big role in that, because I believe even at receiver, mindset is established from the coaching staff. And here's what I mean. It's not the players, because I've seen players come in with the right attitude and get it beat out of them. So I was throughout the Brian Kelly era. They would beat that attitude out of them and just make them very calm. So you can have it as players, and if the coach doesn't build on it or make it healthy, some guys have come in with a great compete level, but it was never harnessed properly, and so they were just emotional. And emotional can get you in a bad place in football as well. You can't be emotional. Being physical, fighting back, it's not emotional, right? It's a mindset. And I want to see if this group is capable of doing that this year. And if they do that, this team's going to be really good, because I love the talent, but I'm sympathetic to the notion that, yeah, but I need to see it. And that's fair. And if it does, then I think some of the angst towards Mike Brown goes away, because you realize, okay, maybe he's not a great recruiter. Maybe he never will be. Maybe he's just not there yet. But, man, this guy can coach some football. And he's, for the next couple of years, is going to have a pretty talented group of players. You're going to have Greathouse for at least 2 more years. Faison, KK Smith, at least 2 more years. You're going to have Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert and Logan Saldate for at least 3 more years, So you start getting excited about what it can be. And if it can get coached right, then I think this group could be this receiving core has a chance to be the best one Notre Dame's had top to bottom in a very long time. Even better than 2015 from a depth standpoint. Although, the starting talent, there may not be a Will Fuller, but maybe their slots better than Amir Carlisle and their boundary guys better than Chris Brown, right? And so those are things you look at and say, if Mike Brown can get them to play to the level that I think their talent should dictate, this team is going to be very good. And I'm excited to see that. All right, let's talk about the defense as we kind of wrap this up and finish up this conversation. And it starts with a conversation we've had a lot of already today, and it's the D-line. And I think Al Washington has a huge opportunity this year to establish himself, because I was having a conversation with somebody about this about a month ago. The question was, why is Al Washington not getting the credit for the job he did coaching the D-line that he should? My answer was, it's simple. You have 2 years of evidence of Al Washington. Number one is 2022, which was not good. I'm not talking about the reasons why. Understandable, not understandable, but they weren't good. It was very average. And you got 2023, which was really good. Now, some people who may not like Coach Washington because of what he's done recruiting or did the year before are not going to give him the credit because, well, Mike Elston recruited all them, et cetera, et cetera. It's fine. But what I said to this person was, this is why year 3 is so important for Al Washington. Because if the D-line comes out and plays to its potential this year, then it's no longer, well, you had one bad, one really good. Which one are you really? It's like, okay, whatever you think about him as a recruiter, and that's a very complex conversation as well. That's not as simple as some people make it out to be, whether they're defending him or attacking him. The reality is the dude can coach. That's what we come out of the season saying, if he can get this D-line to play at the level it's capable of. And so for him personally, I think this is a big year because he can silence a lot of the critics with a big season on the field. And the big season on the field is going to get some of those dudes into the NFL draft. I mean, there's a chance Notre Dame could have 3 guys drafted next year from the D-line. Now, none of them are be first-round draft picks, but there's a chance that Cross, Mills, and Oben are all drafted next year. If that happens, okay, that's going to then help him on the recruiting trail. Hey, guys, if Boubacar breaks out, if Burnham breaks out, it's like, hey, look, you can't give Mike Elston credit for those guys. Mike Elston had Jason Onye for a year. He had Gabriel Rubio for a year. If those guys all break out, then you're like, guys, you got to give Al Washington credit for that one. And that then helps him in the recruiting trail. So for Al Washington, there's that level to it. There's also a level to it that's for the team because, we get asked questions, really good questions all the time. What's better, a pass rush or secondary, whatever. But a great D-line can really eliminate a lot of other areas where maybe you're not as good or maybe you're young or maybe there's schematic deficiencies or whatever the case may be. Being really great on the D-line can fix a lot of those. Maybe your linebackers are young. Well, guess what? If guys can't like maybe Drake Bowen is inexperienced, hasn't played a lot, and that's true. Maybe you've got Kingston in there, or you've got Jalen Sneed in there, or you got Jaden Osborne in there, and they're just not as experienced as a Jack Kaiser. Where you say, hey, look, Jack Kaiser's not a real, he's he's a younger guy. I mean, an older guy, but he's never played a lot inside. He's not a very big guy. Is he going to be able to do this? Hey, guess what? It's a lot easier to be impactful as a linebacker when people aren't blocking you. And people aren't blocking you if their entire focus is dictated towards trying to stop the defensive line. The better the D-line plays, the more disruptive the D-line plays, the more dominant the D-line plays, the better the linebackers are going to be. I remember watching, the only game I saw live at Notre Dame and from, 2012, 2013 season when I wasn't covering the team was the Pitt game in 2012. And I remember watching that game. In the first half of the game, Lewis Nix isn't playing. He was banged up. They weren't sure if he was going to play. He didn't play. And I just remember watching. If you guys remember, Pitt jumped out to a big lead that game against Notre Dame. And so Just first half, they're just chopping Manti. I mean, they're just getting guards to the next level, center to the next level, and they're just chopping Manti. And there's nothing Manti could do about it because they're just getting free runs at him. I don't care how good of a linebacker you are. I mean, if guys are getting free runs at you and they're decently coached, they're going to chop you down. I believe it was a Joe Rudolph offensive line, by the way. And then the second half, they brought – I'm talking about Lewis Nix a couple times today. Lewis Nix comes back in the game, right? So they're like, okay, because they thought they could get through the game without him, and they realized they couldn't. So they put Lewis Nix in the game, second half, and Manti just goes off. I mean, Manti's just making tackle after tackle. Pitt can't move the ball anymore, and all of a sudden, Notre Dame comes back and wins that game. I mean, guys, I'm sitting watching him. I was like, you got to be kidding me. I'm like, the year I stopped covering the team, I go out there and, they're just – I'm thinking they're going to, I think it was like, what was it? This was their second to last home game. They were 8-0. They just beaten Oklahoma on the road the week before. They'd beaten Stanford. They'd beaten Michigan. I'm like, Pitt, man, they're going to smack Pitt. We had a bye week that week, so I was able to get to the game. And I'm thinking, like, this is going to be really cool. I'm going to get to watch them hammer Pitt, and I'm just excited. And I'm going to sit there in halftime thinking, like, holy moly, like, I'm going to watch this team undefeated streak go down. I was like, maybe I'm the bad luck for Notre Dame because of how, I mean, they went in the fourth quarter down 20-6. And you're thinking, boy, this is just not good. This is just really not good. And just second half, especially fourth quarter, Pitt couldn't do anything on Notre Dame because the D-line took over that game. And that's what a D-line can do. This D-line has a chance to be that. And so it's not Al Washington proving that he can coach a really good D-line. He coached a really good D-line last year. The question is, can Al Washington get this line to play at an elite level, like truly elite level all the time where they just take games over? He's going to have the talent to do so in a lot of places, but there's some parts he's got to figure out how to use them and, get certain guys to go to the next level. So to me, this is a great opportunity for Al Washington to go out there and like I said, silence a lot of the critics, but it has an impact on the entire team. It has an impact on the deep offensive line because they're getting their butts kicked every day. They got to step up their game. And it has an impact on the linebackers because they're just not getting blocked. It's a lot easier for Drake Bowen to know which gap to go through when the offensive line just opening it up because they can't handle the defensive line. It's a lot easier for Jack Kaiser to get off blocks when the offensive line can't get to the second level because they can't get off the double team because Riley Mills or Gabriel Rubio or Jason Onye or Howard Cross or Donovan Heinisch or somebody's kicking their butt. Those are all very important aspects to just being really good. Your DBs are going to make a lot more plays in the football. Look, probably the best the D-line played all year from a pass rush standpoint was against USC. I mean, and look how disruptive they were against the best quarterback in college football up to that, from the previous year and a half that had been the best quarterback in college football. They made it. Literally, Caleb Williams had very good numbers last year, but a lot of people just remember the Notre Dame game and just how terrible he looked because of the pressure. And all of a sudden, Xavier Watts is picking off passes that were thrown to wide open tight ends because the pressure forced him to sail the ball. They're not seeing Xavier coming from the backside because Caleb Williams is just harassing, moving around and trying to get the ball out. He doesn't see Benjamin Morrison baiting him to throw, back across his body when he's rolling left because the pass rush is so consistently on him. And then you watch other quarterbacks that don't get the same pass rush and they're more comfortable in the pocket and they're able to pick you apart. So those are things that they're going to have to do. And then the other thing for me from a coaching standpoint is I want to see what Mike Mickens does this year. Like, what does the secondary look like with Mike Mickens now in charge of the entire secondary? We know Mike Mickens can be the best, is arguably the best cornerbacks coach in college football. I mean, he's in that conversation. What I want to see this season, and I think we will, but it still has to point it out. Will he be able to maintain that level of excellence at corner while also coaching the safeties? Will the corners continue being elite and the safeties can then raise their level of play? Because the safeties were pretty well coached in the past. I had a little intel piece. I'll just give you guys this little tidbit. One of the intel pieces I got from a good source was there was a note on how much more communication there was within the secondary compared to last year. Because in the past, you had O'Leary coaching the safeties, Mickens coaching the corners, and then they would come together. But now, when Mickens is installing something, they're all together, corners and safeties. There's more communication going on now. And that could be good for them. But do they lose the technical prowess? Do they, they'll have multiple eyes on the secondary group, but there's just going to be some questions about, okay, can both play? Can he get the safeties to play at the level he has the corners playing at? That's going to be the question. And if he does, then what we think this defensive secondary will be that. It'll be a top 5, one of the best in the country type of group. And guys, there's a chance that Notre Dame this season could have a top 5 defensive line and a top 5 secondary. And I don't know that the linebackers can get to that level because they're so young, but they don't have to be that if what's in front of them and behind them is that good. And so I think those two coaches, in a very positive manner, are very key to success this season, because like you could say Max Bulla, but I don't think there's as much pressure on Max Bulla, because if the D-line does what it's capable of doing, it makes Max Bulla's job way easier. If they don't, it makes Max Bulla's job a lot harder, whether he's a first-year full-time coach or a 15th-year full-time coach. I don't care how good of a linebackers coach you are. If your D-line's not dominating, you're going to be somewhat limited on just how good you can be in those moments when they're not dominating. And the same thing on the secondary. Like, look, if you're playing at that high level, your job as a safety is, my run fit is as simple as, I got to make the linebacker right. And so linebacker may have a bad run fit, but if the safety's taught the right things, he's going to come down, fit off of him, and he's there to make the tackle. Right? Like, that's what well-coached safety groups do. And so will Mike Mickens get that group to play like that with a lot of new faces? We'll see, because yes, it's got a chance to be better. And last year's group was really good, but there's really only one safety coming back this year from last year's group that really played any meaningful minutes. When you look at the nickel, the 2 safety spots, and corner, there's a lot of new faces. Talented, but a lot of new faces. So it's up to Coach Mickens to say, okay, I'm going to get this group playing at a high level. I'm going to get this group to go out there and really thrive and be the units capable of being. And if those two coaches are able to get the most out of their players, this defense is going to be special. Very, very special. And I don't think anybody on defense has pressure on them this year. I think they've already proven they're very good football coaches. The question is more about, okay, but how good? Are they just good with really good talent, or are they really good coaches with really good talent, which is how you have a championship caliber defense? And we're going to find out if this group can be that, and it all starts tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that very, very much. We have a super chat here from Patrick Fitzgerald. Super chat. Thank you very much, Patrick. Coach, did Jonathan Taylor play a big role in the offensive line improving at Wisconsin, or can that be attributed to Rudolph improving as well? I mean, look, you don't rush for the kind of yards that Jonathan Taylor rushed for if your offensive line is bad. And I've said this a bunch of times. Joe Rudolph is not a bad offensive line coach. Joe Rudolph is better than what Jeff Quinn was. I mean, it's not really a conversation. Like, guys, we're not talking anymore about whether or not a guy's good or not. We're past that. We're having a conversation about, is this guy a championship caliber coach or not? I mean, even last year, Joe Rudolph was a solid coach last year. But you look at at what he did at Wisconsin, and you say, well, he had some years with Jonathan Taylor. Was pretty good, right? I mean, Jonathan Taylor rushes for 1,900 yards as a freshman. As a team, they run for 222. The next year they come out, they run for 273 yards a game. He has over 2,000 yards. They average 6.2 yards a carry. The next year they come out, they're over 230 yards a game. Still have Jonathan Taylor, rushes for over 2,000 yards. They weren't quite as good as they were the year before. He was at 7.2 in 2018, drops down to 6.3 in 2019. And you say, okay, well, what kind of players what kind of group is he really going to have? Did Jonathan Taylor deserve a lot of that credit? Absolutely did. Go look at what Jonathan Taylor's doing in the NFL right now, right? Like, when he's healthy, from everything I read and see, he's pretty flipping good in the NFL too, right? So he's a heck of a back. Jonathan Taylor is a great back, in my opinion. The question then becomes, how good is the O-line in that situation? Well, the O-line, you don't suck if you're rushed for those kind of yards. But I do think Jonathan Taylor deserves a lot of that credit, and the O-line just did its job. But I've said for a while that, if you have success when you have a great back, you're a good coach, but that's kind of like, you're going to have a level of production. My question is this: can you be a coach that gets great production from your run game when you don't have a great back? And this is something that I've pointed out to when it comes to what Coach Hestan did in 2017. And I've pointed this out plenty of times. And so one of the things that really impressed me about the job that Coach Heastan did in 2017 was it didn't really matter who was at running back. And in the game I love to point to is, if you guys remember the Michigan State game that year. And Michigan State that season finished with the number 2 run defense in all of college football. So I'm actually going to pull that statistic up. So run defense here, go to 2017. Michigan State finished number 2 in all of college football that year, giving up 95.3 yards per game. The only team that was better was Alabama, who gave up 94.7. So they're 0.6 away from tying to be the number 1 rush defense in college football. And I remember watching Notre Dame that year go out and rush for 182 yards against them. The impressive thing is they came out in that game and they were running really well in the first half. Josh Adams has that inside zone cut back to the left, comes right behind Alex Bars, who just plants a guy, and he's kind of going off. And he gets net banged up. And Dexter Williams comes in. Now, keep in mind, Tony Jones didn't even play in this game because he got hurt the week before against BC. And so they come out, and Dexter's going off. Then Dexter gets hurt. So they're basically playing the last half of that game with Deion McIntosh as the only healthy running back that they had, and Deion was making runs. Deion was making plays. Like, I remember against the Wake Forest game later that year when Notre Dame just ran all over Wake Forest later in the year. And you're watching that team and you're just like, they ran for 380 that game and 8.3 yards per play. But I remember, like, late in the first half, Notre Dame is just kind of looks like they're going to run the clock out a little bit. They put Deion in the game and they run. I can't remember if it was a buck sweep or outside zone. I can't remember what the play was. But Deion rips off a long run and it gets them going. Like, it really didn't matter who they put in at running back. They were just going to be dominant. And now look at the box score from that game. So Josh Adams only had 5 carries for 22 yards that game. Dexter had 3 for 33. Tony Jones had 10 for 59. Deion had 9 for 63. And Brandon Wimbush had 12 for 110. It didn't matter who ran the football. They're going to be great because the offensive line was the driving force. What was that the case? Was that true at Wisconsin? Or was that more about just Jonathan Taylor was just that good and the system was going to have him run that much? That's a fair question. And what I'd say is Joe Rudolph had good lines at Wake Forest, at Wisconsin. The question is did he have great lines? Because the year after Jonathan Taylor left, they went from 233 yards a game to 164.5. And they went from 5.3 yards per play to 3.9. And then in 2021, they jumped it to 210.9. They only averaged 4.8 yards per carry. And they just did not perform well against most of the good defenses they played that year. They ran for a bunch of yards against teams that just really weren't that good on defense. And then, obviously that year was his last year at Wisconsin. So I wonder if, you have to ask yourself, how good is he really? And he's good, but is he great? That's what he has to prove this year. And I don't know the answer to that question. And so far you can't say that he is, but I don't think you can say definitively he's not. And this year is going to tell us if he is. If he's one of the 10 best offensive line coaches in college football, you're going to see it this year because he's got talent. It's just whether or not he can keep it rolling. So thank you for the super chat, Patrick. I really appreciate that, guys. That's going to do it for today's show, everybody. I really appreciate y'all very, very much. Real quick, Alex Rohr, Monty Ball, Melvin Gordon, and James White were all pre Joe Rudolph. They were offensive line. They were running backs before Joe Rudolph got there. So just a little quick note on that. But anyway, folks, have a great rest of your day. We'll be back tomorrow again. It'll be later in the afternoon. It won't be at 1 o'clock. It'll be after we get back from the show, from the practice. I got to write the practice report. So make sure you stay locked in to irishbreakdown.com. Make sure you sign up for the message board. You don't want to miss out on that at all. You're definitely going to be a part of what we got going on there. Definitely enjoy we have a lot great intel pieces on there about the offense, about summer workouts and what we expectations. You got some intel on there about Deuce Knight, some other things. So definitely check that out. And just great communication overall, great content overall on there. So we'll have the practice report. Then once the practice report is over, I'll have a show where we'll break down what we saw. Well, I'll break down what I saw in practice from with what we see. We have full practice tomorrow, so it's gonna be a lot of fun because football is here. So I'm excited about it. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you for being with me today. Hope y'all enjoyed it. and I'll see you guys again tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.